And here we go, hopefully. I've had to sort out a few issues with the connection from OBS to YouTube, but it seems to be working now. I'm now streaming live. This is Peter with you once again. Hello to all of you out there in YouTube land. Some of you will probably watch this after the fact, even though there's no one in chat right now. In the future, I do hope to actually schedule these things in a way that can give people some heads up of when I'm going to do a YouTube live stream. And I'm hopefully, in the not too distant future, going to be doing these, first of all, more regularly. And also, I'm planning on doing some interviews, bringing on guests, some things where it's just not me messing around and randomly talking to people, that sort of thing. So, at any rate, for those of you wondering where I've been, it's one of those things where, what can I say? I am not, as the kids like to say nowadays, terminally online, and it kind of amazes me that it's been since October since I did one of these live streams, and before then, I don't know when the last time I made a proper video was, so it's been a minute. Life happens. But this time, rather than try and do the paint setup, which I was doing before, I thought that didn't really work out. It was kind of too distracting and just trying to constantly have what I was painting in the frame of the camera, it was just too much of a pain. So this time I'm going to try something completely different. I am going to be working on some Dungeons and Dragons stuff, and I got a program called Dungeon Alchemist that I'm going to be building some maps and things in, and I might switch to different programs, but I figured I'd mess with that. And in the meantime, I'm sure people will eventually make their way into this and come say hey, and then we'll see where it goes from there. And till then, I guess I'll just waffle and talk a load of nonsense. Let me switch over here. Okay, so this program, Dungeon Draft is a completely different program. This is called Dungeon Alchemist, and another fellow YouTuber turned me on to this, but basically it does what's called procedurally generated rooms. So you can select a room type. Let's go with a dungeon, and then you select how many cells you want it to be. Trying to keep it within the video frame over here. On OBS, you hit go, and then bam, instant dungeon. And you can go in and add individual items. You can, if you don't like what it comes up with, instead of adding individual items, you can go into the room, you can randomize the room, that sort of thing. And oh look, I actually have viewers. Hello to everyone in the chat. I kind of gotta pop to the side and look to see the view count here. There's some way that I should have set this up on OBS, but I didn't realize that. I have the chat window thing up on OBS. So anyway, I am running a D&D campaign. I'm going to be just sort of messing around with this while I talk about whatever and wait for people to come in and say hello and comment and that sort of thing. But basically, in terms of doing YouTube stuff, I've been thinking a fair amount lately about what I want to do with YouTube. And the recent Supreme Court decision, it's not an official decision yet, but the leaked majority opinion of the Supreme Court. On one hand, it didn't really surprise me, but it was one of those wake-up call things where I suddenly realized that I didn't suddenly realize. I'm trying to do two things at once here. I basically realized that the fondest desire and highest goal that the theocratic Christian nationalists have been fighting for the last over 40 years probably closer to 50 years at this point. The thing that has motivated their movement is close to becoming a reality. And I don't think this is, by any stretch of the imagination, the end of it. What are the safest opinions to have on the internet? On the internet, probably anyone will argue with you over anything. It's sort of like taking a philosophy 101 class. You're always going to find that one person that's like, I'm going to disagree. But I've already lost my train of thought. See, I don't know how well this is going to work either. Trying to chat, but also trying to look through this program. There's some sort of evil statue. We will make evil dungeon, yeah. But there is, as always, a lot going on in the world, and it's made me think more about what I'm doing with my YouTube channel and that sort of thing. And in a way, I kind of want to get back into the sorts of videos I used to make, but at the same time, I've moved on. The topics and the audience has moved on. But I'm not saying that I'm nostalgic for like the days of YouTube atheism, but there are days when you have rude reminders that the reasons that I got into making videos like I did have not gone away, and in many ways it's the peril is higher than it was before. So when I first created a YouTube channel, basically it was like, wow, a video hosting site. That was, and I know if you're a younger person this may shock and amaze you, but once upon a time video hosting was a scarce commodity. It was not something you could just go, oh, okay, I'll just upload this to YouTube. If you had video content that you wanted to share with people, it wasn't necessarily easy. So YouTube comes along, and at first I make a channel, for just hosting some dumb video stuff that I made. But I've always been a somewhat opinionated person, and part of that meant that I had very few outlets in real life to talk about some of these things. So part of making YouTube videos was kind of an outlet, basically, for talking about subjects that people in real life aren't necessarily always all that interested in talking about. And eventually I got swept up in what we now lovingly refer to as YouTube atheism. And it made a lot of sense at the time. I mean, prior to that, really, I think what got me motivated, aside from obvious things like September 11th, were I believe it was 2004, the 2004 election, George Bush versus John Kerry, and learning after the fact, after Bush had won, which I was disappointed in, to say the least, that part of the strategy to win the swing states was in states like Ohio, which once upon a time was a swing state, to put anti-gay marriage ballots on the initiative. Not because there was some serious chance that there would be, gay marriage legalized in Ohio at any time, at that time, 2004, but because they knew that it would drive out the evangelical Christian vote. And that basically this was... So realizing that, number one, this was becoming a determining factor in American politics. And I grew up sort of with one parent that was fairly apathetic towards religion, another parent who was much more religious, but was a bit of a church hopper. And so I experienced a fairly wide gamut of Christianity. But amongst the most impactful, the most salient experiences I had growing up were the sorts of churches that tell you that magic cards are evil. I remember that. And one day in church, in this one church, this youth group that my mother had me go to, we got these book holders, business card holders. And these business card holders, instead of having business cards, they had Bible verses printed on them. And those Bible verses, you sort of flip this thing out, and it kind of looks like a badge, like Fox Mulder FBI. Some of the kids in this church took it upon themselves to basically turn these business card holders with Bible verses in them into badges. And they created a little group they called Kids for Christ. And they went around like little, Stasi for Jesus, snitching on the other children and basically confronting them if they swore or spit or did something so-called unchristlike. And that experience really stuck with me, because it basically, these kids who must have been 11, 12 years old, took their religious beliefs and what they were being taught, and it turned them into a kind of secret police. And in my own experience of Christianity growing up, I definitely saw a lot of the fear and the paranoia and the moral panic that what I'm seeing right now feels like all of that turned up to 11. And the sorts of people that are engaged in this thing, most of them seem to be of the sort who were like the kids who turned the Bible holders into badges and became, little Stasi for Jesus, being secret police, snitching on the other kids and calling them out. And as I look around the sort of political landscape, the main thing animating so much of what is going on that I disagree with is very much in the vein of this basically Christian nationalism, or God wants us to rule America brand of fundamentalism, however you want to phrase it. And I think that there's a part of me that realizes, yes, the whole days of let's all have freshmen in philosophy debates over the existence of God, that's a bit passé now. But at the same time, I feel like, I don't know, a renewed sense of purpose in regards to basically confronting those sorts of people. And I've been thinking about a different approach, not the same old, like, let's argue over the existence of God type things that were popular in the past. Because, as I said, at this point, that's pretty well played out. But more focusing on what I like to call TPR, theocratic politicized religion, because I think that's a very specific aspect of religion and what it teaches. And I want to start making some videos breaking a lot of that down, because there's definitely a structure and a hierarchy to it. And there's a lot of books that I've read on the subject. I think it's probably, of all the related subjects, it's definitely one of those subjects that I've read more books specifically on that subject than most. I just recently read a book, or actually I haven't finished it yet. I believe it's called The Power Worshippers, that really gets into how these things are organized, how they are connected to the Republican establishment, how it filters down from these groups that coordinate with the Republican establishment to billionaire donors like, the DeVosses and the Princes and all these other major donors, to organization, things at the organizational level like Focus on the Family and all these other groups, down to organizations that network with churches, down to the individual churches, down to the believers. There's sort of a pyramid to it, basically. And to the commenter, you're saying Christian nationalists. Yes, absolutely Christian nationalists. And it seems to me that on one hand, what I've been thinking about is, on one hand, by some metrics, these things are in decline. And as I said, it's also sort of passé to have, freshman philosophy debates over the existence of God. On the other hand, because of the organizational structure, you think about a church and you have dozens, hundreds, thousands of people all coming together at the same time in the same place, that basically these organizations are able to use the power of a church, in that it's one of the few social institutions that really remain, not that reliably can organize people in our increasingly atomized, bowling alone type society. That in a way they're a perfect vehicle for organizing people that allows this minority of people to punch above their weight. If you look, even amongst Christians, are the majority of Christians this kind of fundamentalist Christian nationalists? No. Are the majority of Americans this? No. The majority of voters? No. But they are, through clever organization and in-group discipline, able to punch well above their weight. And their agenda is that every knee shall bow, that we will all be subject to them, because they believe it is their birthright to rule America. It is their divine birthright, and their birthright handed to them through, the near biblical founding fathers. And this is all convenient for their own grasping for power, of course. But taking over the Supreme Court and getting these rulings that are seeking to further their vision is really only part of it. And I think that there really needs to be another pushback on all of this, like there was more than a decade ago now. It's been probably the better part of it. I think the New Atheist books started to come out in 2006. Really started to take off maybe more in 2008 in terms of YouTube, because YouTube was still relatively new in 2008 or in 2006 when those books were coming out. But I think that there's not necessarily a dropping of the ball or missing of the point, but a lot of people tend to focus on calling them fascists or nationalists. But the religious component, when you really dig into a lot of what's going on, I think the religious component cannot be understated. And it's not just any particular brand of Christianity. It is the right-wing fundamentalist brand of Christianity. And some people say evangelical, but I don't really like that term all that much, because I think fundamentalist is more on point, because the term fundamentalist comes from these series of works called the Fundamentals. And the Fundamentals were something that were basically funded, the writing and distribution of was funded by a California oil magnate over a century ago. If you remember the movie There Will Be Blood, if you think of what was the character's name? Daniel Plainview. Like, if you imagine if he became a sincere holy roller in that movie, that's the sort of person who put out these works called the Fundamentals that became the basis of fundamentalist Christianity. And it has always been reactionary. It has always been socially conservative. It has always been astroturfed by billionaires for whom a certain brand of subservient pro-capitalist Christianity is convenient to them. And so a term like evangelical is probably too broad, because evangelical can encompass fairly liberal Christians, from the most liberal spectrum of Christians to conservative Christians. It's applied as a very broad term, whereas fundamentalist, I think, kind of narrows down what it typically is. But evangelical Christians, in many ways, of the liberal tradition of evangelicals, many of them were basically the OG social justice warriors of their day. less so now, but in past decades, past centuries of American history, evangelicals could, at least some of them practice things like the social gospel. And so to use the term too broadly, you're just going to run into these people who say, well, actually, evangelical this, they're going to try and slip out of it. So fundamentalist, Christian nationalist, those sorts of things that are more on point with what is actually being discussed, to me, seems to be, better specifying. But I've started to do outlines and notes for really making videos breaking down some of the organization and the hierarchy of these structures and how it feeds into the not only the current reactionary politics of the right, but just the where the conservative Trumpist movement is in general, because that's another thing that people often put to the forefront is Donald Trump. But the Christian nationalists sided with Donald Trump basically because he was someone, in terms of a social agenda, who was willing to write them a blank check. And that's, aside from the fact that many of them are morally bankrupt Pharisees to begin with, they were able to, go along with Trumpism in no small part because they knew that he would deliver on whatever, in the absence of having any other kind of meaningful policies and initiatives of his own. I mean, he's putting his 30-something-year-old son in charge of like peace in the Middle East. It's like, oh, Jared will just take care of all of this. No real focus, no real idea what he's doing, but he knows how to win over a certain uber loyal segment of the Republican voting bloc, the Christian nationalists, the uber fundamentalists. And, things like cults and, the moral panic and those sorts of things that I have been interested in for, the better part of 20 years. There was a time when it seemed, like slightly quaint, and now maybe it's in part due to social media being able to amplify and spread a lot of these things. I can really say like, wow, moral panic is back. Hey kids, remember when parents thought that Dungeons and Dragons was satanic? All of that's back now. Welcome to everything that's old is new again. At first they bring back the fashion in the movies of the 80s, and now they brought back the moral panic and moral outrage of uber conservatives of the the 70s and 80s as well. It's all circling back around, but I think that a lot of that really has to be dealt with in that way, as like, look, you are in the midst of a moral panic. And you need to calm down, rip your head out of Fox News's ass or whatever, even more extreme right-wing media you're mainlining now, and maybe get some perspective. But anyway, hold on. Let me. I've noticed a few comments here, but they're kind of just out of my line of sight. So let me see. Wow, great to see you live. You're one of my favorite YouTubers back in the Venom Fang X days. I think you are the only one I still subscribe to from back then. Where I live, there are still people with Trump 2020 flags on their houses. Justin. Okay, Justin. Are you sure? You might want to inspect those more closely. Do they say Trump 2021 or Trump 2020, or do they say Trump 2024 yet? Because I've already seen the Trump 2024 flags. Let me take a sip of tea here, and then I got a story about this. Let me switch the camera for a second. How many do I have views? 15 views. Wow. I should probably pull this over. Oh, that's over the... Okay, that's concurrent views. Okay. So, it's kind of weird to be full screen on this. Let me go back to this. So anyway, last year, I'm muted. Am I muted? It's not showing me as muted. That would be bad. That would be rather awkward if I just said a bunch of stuff and it's like, actually, you're muted. Okay. You're not muted? Okay. This is a troll, maybe. So anyway, last summer, I went to upstate New York on a trip to visit friends. And I went to meet up with my sister out in this place in the Adirondacks that we used to hike as kids. And as I'm driving through this place, right, I see, I get to this town, what was it called, like Bloomingdale, New York. It is sort of between Saranac Lake and Malone. And if you're not familiar with upstate New York, it's basically middle of nowhere, and middle of nowhere closer to Canada is basically the best way I can describe it. And this town, Bloomingdale, it's got like, the population must be in the hundreds. It is far from anything. And I'm driving through. I get some nostalgia seeing this old store that used to be there that I remember. That is, it's closed. It's closed down now, but I could see, the sign was still there, and the vacant building, and thinking about going there as a kid and kind of getting some nostalgia. And then I keep driving, and I go past this fork, and I go past this old church that's, it's like this nice old church, but it's sort of falling into decline. And I start seeing these houses, and I see one of these houses, and it's like, one is like Trump 2024, and then other one's like, don't blame me, I voted for Trump. And I got like irrationally angry at this. I don't know what it was about this set me off, but I think what it was to me at the time was I thought, okay, you live in just the most middle of nowhere of middle of nowheres. This is a tiny town in the middle of the Adirondacks, just culturally and geographically isolated. The only access to the wider world this person probably has is from, their satellite television. I'm sure that they're beaming in Fox News on their satellite television, and that's their view of the world. And I can tell you that a lot of people, it's true in general that a lot of people just don't go that far out of their own hometowns. I think most people spend most of their lives something like, 50 miles from where they grew up or where they live. But I can tell you that's definitely the case with a lot of these people. And I thought, you live in the middle of nowhere, in probably one of the whitest parts of the state, if not the country. You have never, like Bill the Wall, you have probably never even met an illegal immigrant in your life. This little, isolated, culturally and geographically isolated pocket that you see is not America. And what you see on television and what you're being told about what's going on in the rest of America is almost certainly just, at best, completely exaggerated, more likely, total bullshit. This is something that people talk about, like fake news, and I don't believe the mainstream news, I don't believe this, that. But what gets me is that so few of them that say things like that seem to have any actual like media literacy, and that they will fall for what are the most elementary tricks of media. And so I'm sure in the minds of a lot of these, people with their heads buried up Fox News's ass, that the Black Lives Matter protests were on the verge of burning down all of America, but before, Trump, bravely sent out people, stormtroopers to gas them all, or whatever their narrative is. They probably had this vastly exaggerated view of what something like of the scale and scope and severity of things like protests and looting, because while they say that they don't believe the mainstream media, they don't seem to count Fox News as mainstream media. They always make an exception for their preferred news source, and somehow imagine that it's not mainstream, even when that's patently ridiculous. And what it is to me is the media rarely outright lies. It's hard for them to get away with just completely fabricating a story, although sometimes they're not above that, particularly when we're talking about right-wing propaganda. The thing about the media and what makes it deceptive, I guess you would say, I was about to say insidious, but deceptive, is that it presents a false picture of the world in which you think that, okay, this is the best example I can come up with. I don't know how old any of you are, but when I was a teenager, I used to like watching the show Total Request Live, along with one of my older sisters. Every day after school, pretty much every day after school, we'd watch Total Request Live with Carson Daly. And they would always show, like, the hype and the buzz surrounding the live recording in Times Square, and they'd pan the cameras out to show the crowd out there in Times Square and make it look like a really big deal. And then one day, I think I want to say 16 years old, we went down, to Manhattan to go to this band, like national band recital, type of thing that my cousin was performing in at Carnegie Hall. So there was this, high school band showcase at Carnegie Hall, and one of my cousin's high school bands was in this showcase. So we get a hotel like a block from Times Square, and we had some time the day before or the day of, or whatever it was. And so we're going to go down to time. We're a block away from Times Square. It's a weekday. Total Request Live is being broadcast. Of course, we have to go check out Total Request Live. And the experience of actually seeing what it was like in person, what Times Square was like in person. All the people that showed up there, they were sort of corralled into this one area. You couldn't really see anything. You couldn't hear anything. You could only get into that corralled off area if you had showed up really early, apparently. And it was it just the juxtaposition between the way that it is presented on TV in order to add to the hype, because it's a live show and they want to make it seem like, hey, look at all this hype. And so they have all these people, like, in this little corralled off area in Times Square to cheer and hold up signs. But the reality of it was like a big nothing burger. I did not envy the people who showed up early to get into this corral, to be stuck there and, to maybe once or twice cheer on command, not be able to see anything, not to be able to hear anything. The cops were probably more irritated and short-tempered than New York City cops usually are. And I remember standing on the sidewalk, clearly facing away from the MTV studio, clearly trying to cross to the other side of the street, because maybe from there we could actually get a vantage into where they were filming Total Request Live. And the cop was just like, move along, move along, move along. And just, the cop was just miserable, I could tell. He's probably he just saw that we were teenagers and just wanted to get rid of us as fast as he could. And with any sort of thing, the way that the media would present something, especially if you're Fox News and you want to present something like Black Lives Matter protests, and maybe something happens like looting riots, it's very easy to use the camera and use editing to present that to be a much bigger deal than they are. The reality of any of these sorts of events that you see on the news is always different than the way that they're presenting it. And you can always skew the way that you present it. And that essentially is the core, like how the media presents things is the core of how it gets its point of view across. It frames the story, and how it distorts the truth. It rarely does it fabricate events, although obviously there are certain occasions like where, Fox News wanted to make this one right-wing rally seem better attended than it was, so they took crowd footage from a completely different event at the same place. It's like, look how many people are here. That sort of, fabrication, basically. But rarely can they just outright fabricate events. It's more in controlling what they present and how that the media, frames the narrative for people to believe. But so many people, they say they claim to have all this media skepticism. They claim to not believe in the mainstream media, this, that, and the other thing. And yet they're very eager to just, take at face value many of the things that are presented to them in their media, in their favorite news broadcaster of choice, with no real discernment about just no media literacy about how news is constructed and how the way that they present you events determines how you look at that event. I remember there was a meme. This was years ago now. I don't remember what the protest was, but it showed this image of like a burning trash can, and then it panned back. It was like the one shot was a burning trash can. It looked very dramatic, like, oh, there's a riot going on. And then you see, the second part of the meme was this wide shot of this trash can, and in context, not a lot was going on other than this trash can, knocked over on fire trash can, but this trash can was like surrounded by photographers, and they're all trying to get this big dramatic shot, and that's the way that they're going to present it to you, the news consumer. Shaping the way that you view the event is the main way in which the media, quote unquote, lies to you or deceives people. It's not a matter of outright fabricating events altogether, which a lot of people seem to think. And so they have these terms like fake news, like, oh, that's not really happening. It's like, no, you can't just get away with making up fake news in that sense, because they never actually, when somebody claims fake news, that's, I believe the term is thought-terminating cliche. They never go out of their way to actually debunk the story or refute it in any way. They just spout this phrase, fake news, and that's the term is thought-terminating cliche. They don't have to think about it anymore. It's this canned response that says, Before 9/11, New Year's in New York was crazy. It was crazy fun. You could walk anywhere. I'm not really sure. Yeah. New Year's in Times Square, it's much more corralled off now, and, lots of security. There was one year that I came close to going to, this was probably 2000, like New Year's Eve, 2011, 2012. I came very close to, actually going to, the New Year's Eve ball drop in Times Square, and then I just thought, nah, I don't think it just didn't feel worth it to me. And plus at the time, I just didn't think I had the extra money, and it would have been a hassle. But yeah, any comments from anyone on the stream? Any commentary? Any questions? I know I've been kind of rambling. If you're wondering what this is a program called Dungeon Alchemist. I'm basically messing around with it, trying to come up with some maps for a campaign that I'm running. Although, I'm not sure exactly what I would do with this, to be honest. What to do with a dungeon. So, the thing I like about this program, though, is that on one hand, I like the 3D aspect of it. I like that you can like procedurally generate maps and that sort of thing. It's definitely a work in progress. I know that they are planning a lot more for it. This is like a early access on Steam type of thing. But they definitely have a lot more to work out. And it's definitely geared more towards interior stuff. Like you can do outdoor battle maps, but it definitely has a more interior focus to the point where let me just give an example. Like, let's say you want to build something. Let's go to the draw room, a village, a town square. Now, a town square probably wouldn't have a walls around it, but it just by default puts walls around everything. And it's also sort of a pain to remove those walls because you basically have to select one thing at a time. And all of those things, like being able to select multiple things, being able to build things without walls, those are it's like those are the to be determined, not to be determined, but like the work in progress features of it. And yeah, I guess it makes sense from a procedural generation why it might default to things like that. But it's like, oh, this shouldn't have a wall. I want to make, a town square, but this shouldn't have a wall, and it's kind of a pain in the ass to deal with. So what setting am I running? It's a homebrew setting. Basically, it has a bunch. It's so I started to think about the D&D settings. And I thought, okay, from a world building point of view, what would a world actually be like if it had all of these different sentient races sharing a world together? And I thought, just the very premise of a lot of these Dungeons and Dragons worlds, that you have all of these different sentient races, they all co-evolved or coexist on these same worlds, along with worlds that are full of monsters and other things. It's kind of a strange from a realistic world building point of view, and it's just part of the conceit of D&D that you just have to let things like that slide on one hand. On the other hand, I started to think, what if they had some sort of portal system like Stargate or Mass Effect, although Mass Effect is more in space. So basically my homebrew campaign, theoretically, I could go to any of the traditional D&D planets or settings or that sort of thing, but it's a universe where planets are connected together by these gates that are sort of like stargates, and they were created in eons past by unknown beings, sort of like Mass Effect. I'm not saying this is the most original premise. I'm just saying that this is instead of trying to build a single world that may or may not make sense in my mind, and I may or may not have to have limitations in order to get it to conform to what I think would be some sort of world I could make sense of. It's basically like, here's a system by which you can connect any of these worlds together. And the place where my party is right now, the party that I'm DMing for, it's basically, there's a main hub city that has a lot of portals to other places, but there are 5 portals that are controlled by dukes, and they all go off to these private dukedoms where there's one portal in, one portal out. And it's this campaign, or at least this part of this campaign, is sort of like a locked room mystery where all of these all the monsters in this duchy were supposedly driven to extinction. Were all killed off a century ago. But the suddenly so after after all the monsters in this duchy supposedly having been killed off a century ago, and after it's being a locked room mystery type of situation that suddenly all the land is overrun with monsters. So they're trying to figure out, okay, how is this even happening? And it's been an interesting experience so far. I've definitely gotten maybe way too into a lot of different map making software and wiki making software, and it's one of those things where it's turned out to be very high tech, and I really have to hand it to my players for just rolling with a lot of the stuff, because I'm like, okay, we're gonna have a Discord server, and we're gonna have Fantasy Grounds, and oh yeah, could you make a D&D Beyond account, because the D&D Beyond account, your character sheets on the D&D Beyond account can roll through this Avray bot into the Discord server, and then I'm making this wiki for it, this, that, and the other thing, and they've all been very good about rolling with the punches in this probably like needlessly high tech setup that I have going on. But I got to experience Roll20 the other day, and it basically confirmed to me that it was the right idea to go with Fantasy Grounds. When the plague that is upon us first hit in 2020, obviously a lot of people, including a lot of people I knew, started doing D&D games online. And I would say that like 98% of the people that I encountered decided to go with Roll20 because it's free. Or, so-called free. And I was like that one person that went with Fantasy Grounds. I had my reasons at the time. I think in part of just like the features and the fact that at least at the time, like if you wanted to buy books and other material for Roll20, they were charging basically full like physical copy price of like $50, whereas you could actually get digital copies of stuff for Fantasy Grounds for less. And it was they had sales more often, and it was much more tightly integrated with the program itself. And I've now that I've had a bit of experience with both, it's just so much easier to do things in Fantasy Grounds, because a lot of this stuff is just like drag and drop, whereas doing things in Roll20, there's a lot of manual work. It's like, okay, the player rolls. Okay, does this hit? Well, I gotta set up my monsters, and then I have to, go into their little bubbles and have to write in, this is AC, whatever, and then I have to like check the AC of the thing versus the AC of the roll. All of those sorts of things that the DM would normally have to keep track of: the hit points, the AC, does this roll hit or miss, doing saving throws for the NPCs. All of these things or most of these things at least, there's been a few things that I've had to manually program into the thing, are just done automatically. So a lot of things like combat are just drag and drop. There's like, I don't even have to go, oh, does this hit? Does this not hit? It's just, you drag and like you select it, and you either click on your character sheet, or you drag and drop it onto the target, and it's, it just spits out in the chat, hit, miss. Simple. Drag and drop and it will, if it's something that requires a saving throw, it'll automatically roll the saving throw. You don't even have to do anything. And then you drag and drop, the damage. And if the saving throw was failed, it will remember that this thing failed the saving throw and then apply the damage accordingly. And all the tedious, what's the word I'm looking for? Crunch work, like that would normally be involved in DMing and keeping track of all the stats and stuff like that. It's just, I don't have to deal with any of that stuff. Other than occasionally, there are certain features that just bizarrely are not coded in, but it's possible to code them in yourself once you figure out like the syntax of how to put in the stuff, like a potion of healing. There are certain items like armor, weapons, that you'll get like the stuff where you can character sheet, it'll appear on the character sheet where you can roll it or add the effects. If you have armor, it will automatically apply to the AC. But other things like a potion of healing, yeah, you can put that in your inventory, and you can say, okay, I'm doing this, but you have to do it like manually. But I got it to the point where I could actually, what's it called? Where I could actually have that as like a thing that's like an automated item. Let me just real quickly bring up Fantasy Grounds. Check for updates. It wants me to update this like every other time I open it. That's one of the... So I guess probably the biggest... I understand why a lot of people go with things like Roll20, because it's free. So-called free. And it's also browser-based. I had to, I had to pay for the master tier, or not the master tier, the ultimate license or whatever it's called for Fantasy Grounds Unity, to allow me to be able to host people with free accounts. So there was a high upfront cost on my end. Pretty much all the cost is borne by me. But as an actual system, aside from that, what's the new? Hold on, I'm getting some pop-up message. Once a campaign has been opened in this version of Fantasy Grounds, it cannot be reopened in an older version without data loss. No, 2, please back up your campaign folder by making a copy. Oh, jeez. Why can nothing ever be simple? Of course, it's going to do something like this on a live stream. Okay, close. Choose the same network version of Fantasy Grounds. Network version change. Okay. It's just saying a bunch of stuff. So apparently now I need to, that's like saying to update my folder. I just want to make this simple. I just want to update it. And just want to show Fantasy Grounds. I open it up. It's got the little update button flashing. And then of course, the moment I go to update, it's telling me a bunch of stuff about copy your campaigns and etc. etc. You can't use this after you can't go backwards, which, I'm updating it. Why? I don't even know how I would go backwards with this. And that's saying about notifying the players, yada, yada, yada. I'm like, is this... Hopefully this doesn't break the game. Okay, join campaign. No, wait, not join campaign, load campaign. Five concurrent viewers. Not too bad. Yeah, I think I really need to schedule, put these sorts of things on a schedule so that people will know, like, hey, this is going on. And it might draw more, draw more viewers in where, talking to the chat might be more self-sustaining than constantly trying to waffle about things. Let's see, is this open yet? Let's see. Yeah, it's still loading, of course. Of course. Unworshipped deity. Yeah, I'm glad you're still here, because you were who I had in mind when I was opening this program, and I'm not sure what the delay is on, like, the chat, but if you had just, fucked off or whatever, I'd be like, well, now I'm opening this for nothing. Sometimes this thing, yeah, that's another potential downside, is this is an actual program rather than something that can be done in the browser. But they have it for Windows, Windows, Mac, and Linux. So what more do they? It's not like there's cross-platform compatibility issues or anything like that. By the looks of it, I wonder if this is going to screw up the stream. I'm seeing like a massive delay. I got the browser open with the live stream, and it's way behind. Fantasy Grounds is, yeah, this was probably a mistake. I just wanted to show it, damn it. Oh, finally. Finally. Alrighty. So, you're already looking at the D&D stuff. Okay, so let's go. Here's the combat tracker. I will just do a simulated combat. This is another thing that I like about this, is that I am able to basically, oh, for fuck's sake. Of course it's going to crash. There we go. I'm able to open up the program and do simulated combats with this and get a sense of like how it will play out, because that's sort of the weird thing about Dungeons and Dragons. And just to show off some of the organizational features, so here I have the story. I can bring up, I can bring up all this stuff, all the things like the images, maps, whatever I need for this stuff, I can put in there. I can put in, nested things like this. There's a little pin in the map that brings up the encounter. Add the encounter to the combat tracker. Let's see. Initiative. Roll all initiatives. Okay. So I'm basically able to get a feel for how combat scenarios would play out, because this was a discussion I was having the other day on Tuesday after playing in this one shot with I don't know if any of you remember Honest Discussioner on here, but he was doing a birthday one shot, and let's move these characters forward a bit. Talking about the difference between taking on a large, a single character, a single encounter with a creature that has a high amount of hit points, decent damage if it's able to do the damage, versus like a swarm of relatively lower level things that are able to tax the party. And just trying to get so I sometimes come in here and like set up combat encounters on various maps that I have, just to get a feel for what they would be like, and if it's too easy, too difficult, and I just try and go through what I imagine my players might do, or some approximation of it, because sometimes they really do really dumb stuff, and sometimes they do, but at a certain point when you're like, when you have a, what the hell, something disappeared. Oh. So let's have this character. Here's let me clear the chat here, make it more visible. It's probably more than 30 feet, technically. This character runs up, swings his longsword. It's a hit. See, automatically spits out hit. Okay, he's going to Divine Smite. Automatically adds the damage. Swings the longsword. Automatically adds the rolls. You can see that the hit points of the giant crocodile automatically show up in the combat tracker. If there's concentration, any of these sorts of things. And then, yeah, Potion of Healing. This is one of the things that I had to basically create myself. Like, you can, all of these abilities. (2d4 plus 2). Is that even... Is the Potion of Healing 2d4 plus 2, or is it 1d4? Or maybe this is a different potion. I don't know. Anyway. Sometimes, though, you have to make sure that the effects are not added multiple times. So, like, this character has Colossus Slayer and Hunter's Mark. This damage D6 for Hunter's Mark. Sometimes you have to be careful, make sure that like things have been applied correctly. But it'd be interesting to see if this, as many hit points as this thing has, if this will even survive a single round of combat. And if this thing can't survive a single round of combat, then maybe it's too easy of an encounter. And maybe I should put smaller things. Let's see. Yeah, that's definitely, yeah, help balance things out and get a sense for how tedious it is, or maybe even when to pull your punches. Because I found in encounters where I have lots of, where I go wide instead of lots of creatures instead of a single creature it's very powerful, that certain setups can lead to a situation where one lucky hit or one bad situation can really tip things against the party. It's more likely, with the exception of certain creatures that just have one-shot abilities, Zombie Beholder, a lucky shot could just kill a character. Even though most CR5 creatures, some of them have those on a lucky shot it could kill a character. For the most part, the larger characters, like right now my party's facing, they're kind of in the CR5 is their upper limit territory. They still don't necessarily, I mean, there's just certain things that even these larger creatures like a crocodile, it kind of has to, even though the damage it can do can be serious, it doesn't necessarily threaten the entirety of the party, especially when you have a ranger, just doing range attack. You'd have somebody doing range attacks and somebody doing using spiritual weapon and using healing spells. You get you get backline characters. So the temptation would be to go wide and create a bunch of threats that, including threats that are going to be able to, mess with the backline characters. But certain things can easily snowball. Let's have this character charge in flail. That's a miss. Yeah, okay. So this thing could definitely survive one round of combat. And let's see what it actually does. Multi-attack. I think it's a bite and a tail attack. So it's going to bite this character. Miss. Tail. That character. Miss. Yeah, and that's the thing about these. So one round of combat, it's already not quite half. It's approaching half at this point. 36. And that's after, one of the characters missed. It missed its attacks, and it could easily be killed in this next combat encounter, before it can even do anything to threaten the party. And those are the every now and then you want to just give your party something like that to just, I don't know, give them experience points or for story reasons or whatever. But if you're actually trying to challenge your party combat wise, that only did 12. Wow, 2 1s. Yikes. I'm finding that a lot of times that these larger creatures aren't as threatening as words like CR5 make them out to be. So I'm relatively new to this side of the game. I've played as a player, but trying to control the monsters and combat encounters are not necessarily something I was used to before. So having something where I can just run through these sorts of things has taught me a lot, and taught, about the tactical aspect of the combat encounters, which I feel, I get this suspicion that there are plenty of people who basically they're kind of like, depending on what style of DM they are, they might flip through the book and go, oh, I'm going to mess with my party by giving them this, and it's there are obviously thematic reasons, story reasons, thematic reasons. If they're in this kind of environment, you might want to select things that are of this, but it might not be everyone's, I don't want to say cup of tea, to select, monsters and build encounters based on like the tactical aspect of it. But if it is your sort of thing, then this definitely makes it pretty easy, because I just ran through that whole, it only went for 2 rounds. But, and again, you can see that this thing is not that threatening, because it was dead after 2 rounds of the player's combat. It missed on all of its things. Even if it had hit, it's probably, it's not going to put any character in serious mortal jeopardy. But really, I mostly just included this as for this encounter for thematic reasons. But yeah, this map here, the program that I was using before, Dungeon Alchemist, I made that with this. Obviously the layers of what's it called? The layers of like mist and smoke, those are being generated by Fantasy Grounds Unity. But one of the things that I like about Dungeon Alchemist is that when you export it, you can export it with an XML file. It will know where the walls are supposed to be for things like line of sight, and you can export the image and an XML file so that you don't have to manually put in like the walls and other line of sight things that you would have to in Fantasy Grounds and these other programs that use that. So it's a lot more convenient and easier in that regard. But like I said, it's a long way from really being what I hope it will eventually be, because they, on their website, they list all the things that they're planning on, different environments, different room types, like jungles and pirate ships and stuff like that, fixing some of the flaws. Like I said, it will build with walls that are kind of not necessarily, sometimes it'll build walls that you don't need, and then getting rid of them is a huge pain, because they don't necessarily have their selection system set up all that well. But yeah, anyway, let me see if I can open up a map that I already open map. Oh, this is a funny one. Yeah. It's like a Hansel and Gretel gingerbread house. I kind of wish that they would have a what's it called? A camera mode. One of the weird glitches about this is like there's only, you can maneuver the camera, but it won't go low angle enough. This is kind of, this perspective is about as low as you can really angle the camera. You can zoom in, but you can't get to like a real first-person angle, and that's one of the things that they're supposed to be working on. But I kind of wish they would have a mode where you could like put a roof on things just for like screenshot purposes, because it's sort of, it's like, oh, this looks really cool in terms of building a 3D environment that you can, show to your players, but none of these buildings have roofs. But yeah, it's for whatever reason they had like a gingerbread house thing, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna take the gingerbread house, and then I'm gonna put in some dungeon stuff and make it into like a Hansel and Gretel type situation. Let's see what other maps I have built here. It's definitely a strange diversion, because I started out talking about very serious topics like the rise of Christian nationalism that threatens to plunge our entire society into theocracy that is spreading and gaining strength worldwide. And now I'm talking about making gingerbread houses. But that's how it goes when you do things like YouTube live streams. Yeah, this is like a manor house that I'm working on. Yeah, let's see. You can change all sorts of things. Let's change the time of day to like noon. Let's see. Hang on a second. One thing that would really make this program in particular stand head and shoulders above every other map making program is if they eventually incorporate some sort of way to bring in third-party 3D assets. Because a lot of the other map making programs, they have traditional art, it's digital art, but drawn art, and having a 3D printer, I have some acquaintance with just how much 3D stuff there is out there. And if you were, I'm sure that there would be after things, there'd be like formatting issues probably, because in order for the procedural generation to work, it probably requires certain, scaling tags and it has to know what types of objects belong in what types of rooms and that sort of things. But if you could somehow eventually just be able to bring in whatever kind of 3D assets you want into something like this, because that's one of the main problems that I find with any of these kinds of programs, is that eventually you just kind of hit a wall in terms of what's available assets wise, and it starts to get just very boring. And you're like, I don't want to make any more maps with this because I'm just coming up with the same crap over and over. Let's put in a tree. Let's put a tree on top of it. Nah, let's put it here. Yeah. Let's see, how many people are in the... How many people are watching? 4 concurrent viewers. Okay. I guess this is part of the problem with doing any sort of thing on the stream while you're simultaneously trying to talk to people And on one hand, you have to have enough viewers with an active enough chat to propel conversation purely based on the chat. But then you want to maintain some sort of topic of conversation while trying to do something at the same time. And I guess this is a very roundabout way of saying that I'm finding that I'm not super great at multitasking a lot of this stuff. This was something I tried because in previous streams I had done painting, and I found that I was losing focus and waffling too much. Plus, just the camera setup itself was sort of a pain. I didn't like the way that I was trying to hold the what I was painting in a certain way in order to have it show up on camera properly is not really in line with the rest of my setup and how I would normally, sit there and paint something. And so then I thought, okay, I'll do some sort of like screen share thing. But as I said at the beginning, and I don't think there was anyone in the live view at that point, what I eventually want to do is do more live streams, but I want to start having guests and doing more things like interviews. I've been, over the last year or so, I've become strangely fascinated with a YouTube channel / podcasting brand across all sorts of podcasting forums called Mormon Stories Podcast. Now, to be clear, I have not now, nor have I ever been a believer in Space Jesus from the planet Kolob. But I found this channel, I think, through another YouTuber who was a former Scientologist talking about Scientology and cults, and, an interview between these channels, and starting to, watch all of these different interviews. It's kind of fascinating because it's primarily, the host is an ex-Mormon, and a lot of the people interviewed are ex-Mormons, especially after the host was excommunicated from the Mormon Church. So it tends to skew the crowd towards the ex-Mormon crowd. But hearing people tell their life stories and religious experiences, in this case, it's primarily focused on Mormonism and the very particular culture of Mormonism in Utah. But I found the overall presentation of it to be interesting. And as somebody, again, who grew up having never been Mormon and growing up very geographically and culturally far from, the Utah and the Mormon Western stronghold that's like the cultural center of Utah, it's easy for somebody like me to watch things like the South Park or the musical or these other things and sort of, just chuckle at Mormons. But it definitely gave me a different perspective seeing a lot of these interviews with people talking about their life experiences and their experience with the church. And very often it leads to, what led them away from the church and that sort of thing. But it gave me a lot of insights, not only into how organized religion works and how I picked up this phrase from the show, high demand religions rather than cult or fundamentalism, like the mindset of high demand religions and these sort of highly hierarchical religious organizations, and humanized Mormons in a way that's more than just, they believe in Space Jesus from the planet Kolob, and the South Park Book of Mormon type of mockery of that sort of thing. And that interview format of interviewing, Mormons and former Mormons, I think it's an interesting idea. Maybe something like essentially interviewing non-believers, agnostics, atheists, whomever would fit in kind of a broad category of non-religious, and possibly interviewing people about their experiences with religion. And I'm not sure where I would start with those interviews, but I also like to just interview other YouTubers. There's some that there's sort of like different tiers of YouTubers, where it's like, maybe I could get this person to agree, maybe I couldn't. And maybe once upon a time when I was roughly on the level of this person, maybe they would have agreed, but now, they're too big for the likes of me. And then there are other people that I don't have any kind of personal connection with, and maybe they give me the time of day, maybe they wouldn't. again, it's been a while since I've been super active on my channel, so it's kind of like, I don't know, my calling card is, at this point, is less about, oh, I have this really active channel, I have all these subscribers, because let's face it, when people do things like YouTube and they agree to things like interviews, very oftentimes it's either a matter of personal connections, or they think that they're going to be able to grow their audience, grow their reach, whatever else, by agreeing to those sorts of interviews, or maybe it's like, a debate bro thing or whatever. And so it's like I have credibility in that I've been doing this for, 16 years now or something like that. Has it been that long? Yeah, it's probably been about that long. But yeah, in terms of that, it's hard to say who I'd be able to draw with those sorts of things. But that's always been my problem with doing any of these sorts of live broadcasts, is trying to keep momentum going, trying to have something that's going to draw in viewers and be able to be occupied, whether it be trying to paint or trying to mess around with a program or a game, but also paying attention to the chat and keeping it going. And I feel if I was doing an interview or had a guest host for those sorts of live situations, that it would make it a hell of a lot easier if it's just not me talking. Let's see. I'm seeing more stuff in the chat. Looks like you're really putting a lot of work into it. Hope your players are thankful. Yeah, they better be thankful. I recently, my old channel, which was created in 2006, just felt like it was time to start fresh, not for content creation, just in general. Recently deleted your old channel. Maybe post a video on a hot button political issue, a political topic, and maybe that will draw in some folks for interviews. Let me see if I can properly express how I feel about a lot of this sorts of a lot of that type of content. Because when you say that, I think of a certain type of content that I am not inclined to make. Once upon a time, perhaps when I didn't know any better, when I was young and foolish, I obviously made videos that were responses to people like Venom Fang X and other creationists and fundamentalist Christians and other, religious fundamentalists. And obviously that kind of got played out after a while. And there's a certain amount of temptation to respond to the more right-wing political, the more right-wing political worldview, or, a lot of these, you can easily find material for the sorts of things that I would have done a decade ago. But a lot of the political commentator type stuff, I find that a lot of the people, I'm not going to name names right off the top of my head, but I think you'll know the sort of people that I'm talking about. There's a certain type of person that I think they are sophists who have mastered the art of the specious argument, and even trying to engage in a lot of the current political discussion, it's set by those people who I personally find disingenuous. And so a lot of political discussion is driven by bad faith actors who are really just out to so-called win the argument, and the temptation would be to respond to those people directly. But to a certain extent, I think that's a trap. I think a lot of political discussion is just like kids' table nonsense, and a controlling, there are people out to essentially frame the narrative in a certain way. Like a lot of the culture war, I personally think, well, obviously many people on the left have a stake in the culture war, being LGBTQ people or allies, and wanting reproductive rights and those sorts of things. They have a stake in the culture war, but they don't need the culture war in the way that the right needs the culture war. There constantly needs to be this moral panic of the weak. I just, every now and then my Facebook will do something weird. We'll just pop up these advertisements for various things that I don't even know why I'm being the one targeted for this, because it doesn't make sense given who I am, and I wouldn't respond to it. But I saw an ad. It wasn't cancel Disney, because that would be obviously hypocritical. What was the drop Disney? That was the word that they used instead of cancel Disney. I saw this, this ad from some right-wing person trying to get people to drop Disney. Because, I mean, if they just said cancel Disney, then the hypocrisy would be obvious. But they just changed the word, so it's completely different. I mean, dropping something and canceling something are two completely different things, right? Obviously. So much of political discussion, it's kids' table nonsense, and even engaging with it as it is often a trap. And if I was going to make a video about that sort of thing, it would probably be a very meta video that would be a much more structured, less off-the-cuff, more polished version of what I just said. That I think these people, they're sophists. They are full of shit who will say anything, make any specious argument in order to, win the debate as they see it. And I don't intellectually respect a lot of these people. They may sound arrogant, like, who are you, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, I'm not saying I'm the smartest, most well-read, best educated person in the world, but I'm a pretty smart, pretty well-read, pretty educated person. And a lot of these, right-wing political pundits, they're not trying to convince people like me, because that would require them to use facts correctly, make arguments that aren't just specious nonsense, have an intellectually intelligent discussion, maybe acknowledge some ambiguity, maybe dial down the histrionics of all of that. It's really made for a certain kind of audience, and a lot of these people, a lot of that sort of right-wing pundit class, I'm sure they believe in some of it to an extent, but I think a lot of it has to do with that being that persona, making those sorts of arguments, gets them in the door with the the right-wing billionaire donor class. Look at the people who fund them and the organizations that they're involved with and where their funding comes from. There's a lot of money if you're willing to sell your soul to make bad arguments, to be that sort of uber right-wing pundit. And a lot of them just go more and more into the territory of ridiculous, not out of, I think, real personal conviction. I think some of them are, not as out of touch with reality as you might be inclined to think they are based on the things that they say, but that they are essentially, they're playing a character and hamming it up in order to drive this media empire that not only gives them the ego-stroking prestige, but also keeps in the funding from the Mercers and the Koch brothers and all these right-wing billionaires and think tanks that are funding a lot of this stuff. Yeah. Axel Warpshift says, after arguing with creationists here in my 20s, I have zero confidence any time spent arguing with the current right wing would be fruitful in any way. It's been really interesting to see the evolution of that in a lot of ways, because there is a part of me that thinks that, how would I put this? It's difficult to say what of the I don't want to say zeitgeist. What is going on right now is a matter of social media, but then again, social media, as we Facebook has been around since the mid-aughts, or you want to say, YouTube, a lot of these platforms have been around for a long time. It's taken, a little bit of time for people to become more sophisticated about them, but it's not as if these things are really all that new. But when I compare sort of the right wing, where media and the right wing and all these things were 10 years ago, all of these, Facebook existed in like 2010, 2012, and the vibe was totally different. It's, how much of it is like social media, how much of it is culture? And given the portion of it that is culture, how much of that is a recognition that time is not on their side? Because if you look at the demographics in terms of how many people are simply just becoming non-religious, and the ever shrinking percentage of the population of far right fundamentalist Christian nationalists, those things, they must see that like time is not on their side, and the numbers are not on their side, and really haven't been in a long time. And just as I said, much earlier in this stream, they're able to punch above their weight for a variety of different reasons, from the structure of the Senate and the Congress, to gerrymandering, to just being able to be parasitical on churches, which themselves are one of the few social organizations that can reliably pull in people week after week, and you can form some sort of political action group around the dozens and dozens or hundreds or thousands of people that you can all get into the same place at the same time and socializing together like a church. It's one of the few social organizations left in an increasingly atomized society. So they're able to punch above their weight for reasons like that. But at the same time, when I see the sorts of things that they're talking about, like complaining about Disney's Red, and just whatever, they have a new moral panic every week. They are very much into a persecution complex where they have built a cross for themselves. They're nailing in hammering in the nails to their own hands and their own feet, and conjuring imaginary lions, and it's really building it, just really building into this world of persecution. And it's not that those things weren't there, say, a decade, 12, 14 years ago, in, say, the heyday of YouTube atheism, but it hadn't really taken over culture. It seemed much more, it was there, but it was much more fringe. I mean, obviously the persecution complex, if you spent more than an hour with, a fundamentalist Christian, they've probably brought up the whole persecution complex thing at some point. That's just kind of baked into their culture. But it's become just part and parcel of their entire way of presenting themselves to the world at this point. And again, to restate, I really wonder how much of that is basically knowing that they are not as numerically powerful as they think. They're on the losing end of culture in so many ways, and they are just trying to rage against the dying of the light. And that in another 20 years, when increasingly more accepting and progressive and less religious generations have become the core voting blocks and the core cultural blocks, that they are going to be swept into the dustbin of history. And that after losing twice to Obama, that and just seeing the reaction to Trump, it just the messianic tone, and this is our last chance to save America, just the sense of desperation on the right, like the sense of cultural, demographic, intellectual, just like there is just this massive sense of desperation. And it's not to say that they're not a threat, a concern, a danger, because they are, but I just don't feel that sense of desperation was there before. I mean, there was definitely anger at the fact that Obama was president, that sort of thing, certainly. but it's just got a totally different vibe. And I just can't entirely decide whether it's a matter, I want to think, oh, it's social media. It's popular to blame social media. But again, a lot of these sites have been around for, since the Bush administration, right? And they matured to a certain extent, but I don't think that entirely accounts for it. So what exactly is beyond, this increasingly shrill, hysterical sense that the sky is falling? Is it really that just after years and years and years of doubling down on this narrative that it's just reached fever pitch? Is it when they, just how they've been trained to react to losing elections, or, facing anything like that? But let me see. I got more comments. Unworshipped Deity says, I remember when arguments on YouTube were based somewhat on factual information, where the exchange between ideas really seemed to be considered by both sides, but now goes off the rails. I don't know. I kind of feel like people like Venom Fang X, I don't think it was considered on the side of some of them. But I'm going to take a really quick break. I'll be back in a second. And I'm back. Yeah, and I'm looking at the live stream thing in my browser, and it still hasn't even shown me going away yet. So I don't know why there is such a lag between the two. It's just now. I've already come back, and it just now showing me put up the be right back thing. So I guess I'm going to have to waste time until things catch up with themselves. But as I mentioned earlier in the stream, I've been listening to the audiobook of The Power Worshippers. And one thing that I noted down and found interesting was that there was one part of the book where the author is talking about the charter school movement, like the Davos, Betsy Davos charter school movement and the curriculum within some of those schools, within one of the organizations, one of the charter school curriculums. And it had a section on how to think about Vladimir Putin. And I don't remember the exact talking points off the top of my head, but then bear in mind that this book was written a couple of years ago, and it was talking about, Vladimir Putin he's not the politically correct, coddling homosexuals. I don't remember the exact phrase, but what I realized was, wait a minute, this sounds extremely familiar. This sounds almost exactly like what Tucker Carlson was spouting at the beginning of the really what Tucker Carlson was spouting at the beginning of these the Ukraine-Russia war. It made me think that how much of these things like that people like him talk about are basically scripted, because again, he's a perfect example of somebody who is just a sophist who makes specious arguments. But I think he's worse than that. He's even more insidious than that sort of thing. I should switch to camera instead of... I just now realized that this was like showing the YouTube graphs, and it's going to be like picture in picture. Anyway, there's definitely a sort of relatively top-down network of ideas that I think a lot of these people are getting their marching orders from. And obviously, with any sort of situation like this, there's going to be a feedback loop. So there's going to be people who are basically... like the thought leaders, and then the media, and then the public at large. The guy wearing the sunglasses, taking a picture of himself in his pickup truck as his profile picture on Facebook. There's going to be like a circular interchange between all of those people, right? But there's definitely seems to be fairly centralized talking points to some of this stuff. And like I said, this information thing about how to think about Vladimir Putin that was part of the curriculum of a, charter schools, like Christian, Betsy DeVos funded charter schools, DeVos family charter schools. They're writing into this curriculum that, Vladimir Putin and these other autocratic, Christian nationalists in their own country leaders, people who are basically just using religion as a means to, power and to justify their authoritarianism, how these groups are increasingly interconnected and are covering for each other. And it makes perfect sense why somebody like Tucker Carlson, who's, taking his talking points from, all of these right-wing think tanks and whatever bowels of hell, whatever circle of hell he's getting his ideas from, and then spewing them as if they're his own opinion, because I think that he's just, you get those sort of like morally bankrupt people who don't actually speak their own opinion, that are just out there to, regurgitate to the audience what they want to hear and what ideas are already circulating within, the incestuous little ecosystem that they're existing in. But in terms of Christian nationalism, it's increasingly becoming internationalized in places like Russia, which they have a lot of egg on their face because Big Daddy Putin, they had started to cozy up to him, and because he's buddied up with the Russian Orthodox Church and is friends with the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, and he's persecuting all the people that the Christian nationalists in America want to persecute. And of course, there's financial relationships between these things. You had that example of that Russian spy that was involved in the NRA and all these other Republican conferences, and people talk about like Russia collusion and all of these things. And part of that was a big nothing burger. Part of that was legit, but if you widen the scope away from Trump, you realize that a lot of these connections are this kind of like, theocratic, politicized religion, because there are people who realize that what pairs better with authoritarian power than fundamentalist religion that teaches you obedience to God ostensibly, but obviously more importantly, obedience to God's representatives on earth, who, the God's representatives on earth get to say then who is an appointed leader of God. In the United States, when a Republican wins a presidential election, they were appointed by God and it's God's will. When a Democrat wins the election, then clearly this is a subversion of God's will, and this is et cetera, et cetera. Only Republicans are ever, only when Republicans win is it ever God's will. But fundamentalist religion teaches not to question. It teaches obedience. It teaches obedience particularly to earthly leaders, and the idea that certain rulers can be divinely appointed, and that having a regressive and repressive social agenda is actually just standing up for religious principles. And so religious fundamentalism and authoritarian government pair together perfectly, right? That's not to say that all authoritarian governments are that way, but there's definitely a strain within countries like Europe, to a lesser extent like Hungary and Poland, and other former Soviet countries. They're suddenly finding religion can be as useful of a tool of repression and nationalist zeal to support increasingly autocratic leaders as the old Soviet days. And they are increasingly tied together with Christian nationalist movements in the United States. And that's why people like Tucker Carlson were going to places like, going to these places with authoritarian leaders and praising those countries, because it's follow the money. He is the spokesperson for a certain ideology and worldview, which itself is aligned with all of these authoritarian leaders in places like Eastern Europe. And he was literally almost not exactly, it was a paraphrase, but he was basically repeating the sorts of pro-Putin talking points that were already being taught in these religious charter schools that the DeVos family was heavily embedded with, and because there's a financial and ideological interchange with people like Putin. So that's how you end up with these sorts of increasingly globalized, Christian theocratic movements, because at the end of the day, it's really about power. And as I started to say before, I do want to start making more, deliberately scripted, polished videos, and not just, talk about these in a off-the-cuff live stream. But instead of going at it from the point of view of the sort of new atheist style talking points, which are pretty much done and dusted, or having, freshman philosophy debates over the existence of God, to really examine instead the power structures involved. Not only the power structures of, okay, this is, this National Prayer Breakfast is linked to this group, it's linked to these politicians, but it's also linked to these billionaire donors, which also have these organizations to organize like the churches below them, and the churches below them, organize their members into political shock troops for the Republican Party. Here's how they push out their message, etc. Not only analyze it from that perspective, but just also getting into the psychology of it, because as I was just saying, there's something about fundamentalism, that the kind of religious fundamentalism that teaches obedience, that teaches patriarchy, that teaches obedience not only to God but to worldly authority, that teaches not to question, that teaches that they have absolute truth, and anyone else who questions them is a demon or heretic, and they have God on their side, and every knee shall bow to them. That the psychology of it lends themselves to creating these fanatical shock troops. There's the cultural milieu creates a certain sort of person, not only a person who will become an obedient political shock troop, but also the abuse and exploitation that we see in many of these mega churches and pastors and hierarchical church organizations, the abuse and scandals that we see, they create environments rife for those sorts of things, because when you're not supposed to challenge or question your leaders, when you're supposed to be obedient, it's shockingly easy to sweep those sorts of things under the rug. And how they can make those kinds of moral compromises, it starts to make a hell of a lot of sense once you start to delve into the psychology that they are preaching to their members. Let's see, comments. I read that one already. Unworshipped deity, excluding Venom Fang X, of course. Stupid explanations happens. Stupidity explosions happens at some point when Trump got elected. I recall being worried every single day that guy was in the White House. Hey, ever thought of streaming on Twitch at the same time? Reach more people. Also, mega churches are crazy. So I actually have looked into how to do multiple streams. And my understanding is that it requires software, which I do not... I would have to pay for it. And I guess now is as good a time as any to say that I have been thinking about making a Patreon. And I know that I have held out for the longest time with doing that. However, I'm really not one of those people who's like, well, if I get enough Patreon money, I can quit my day job. But as I want to do more things like streaming, I realize that Streamlabs, unless I want to have, or StreamYards as it's called, unless I want to have a bunch of watermarks, that costs money. Upgrading like my video editing software, that costs money. And not just like money, but like oftentimes, because so many things have switched to a monthly, ongoing monthly service model. Like I remember, back in my day, you could just buy Adobe software. You didn't have to pay no $50 a month to no Creative Cloud. Oh, my back hurts. Give me my Advil for my back. Right? The software to, have multiple, like the non-watermarked better versions of, StreamYards to have guest hosts, that there's like a monthly fee for that. There's like fees for the channel splitter stuff to broadcast to Twitch and YouTube simultaneously. Video editing, like upgrading like my, software costs money. And it's not that it would cost a grand amount of money, but again, a lot of this is like, it's ongoing expense type stuff. I'm definitely, so that's made me, that above all else has made me think seriously about starting a Patreon, because again, I'm not one of those people who's like, well, maybe if I get big enough on YouTube, I can quit my day job. There's so many reasons that I wouldn't really want to do that. But, yeah, this stuff costs money, kids. And I realize that I'm never going to get back, like, even just the money that I put in to the things here. Like, okay, this microphone, it's like $200. I have a loop deck. So much of this stuff I bought just to have, I've splashed out a lot of cash to do this crap. And, I wouldn't even, it's not even a matter of recovering the sort of money that I've gotten from that. It's just a matter of like, if I'm going to consistently do things where I'm going to be using software that's going to have like ongoing monthly expenses for stuff like that, that's kind of where I draw the line. It's like, if I pay, you pay. Well, with enough patrons, ContraPoints? I'm not following what you're saying there. So you're really great commentary. Thank you, first of all. And I think Twitch has a lot of social, political commentary. I really don't know how much time you want to invest in this. Blah, blah, blah. In terms of doing live streams, this is something I could do at least every other week. I say, no, I'll take that back. Bare minimum, I could do this at least once a month. If under certain circumstances, I'd probably aim to do it at least, like in theory, I'd probably aim to do it at least every other week, and possibly once a week. I know with a lot, I feel like with a lot of those streaming stuff, it just requires this ridiculously large commitment where you really grow by streaming 5 hours a day every day or something like that. I completely understand why people have Patreons and they say help support this channel, and the people who go for it for a full-time job, because to really have your YouTube channel take off, you really have to grind, and I don't really think I have that much interest or commitment, and I'm not sure in terms of the only thing I've ever streamed on Twitch. I have a channel on Twitch called Game Time with Peter, and I was streaming the Mass Effect games because during like the original lockdowns, I was like, I'm gonna start doing game streaming, and I did that for a little while, and then I just kind of fell out of the habit, and it was really weird too, because I started out streaming the Mass Effect games, and then right in the middle of that there was supposed to be a new graphics card released, and I'm still waiting to like 2 years later for the graphics card to finally be generally available for MSRP and not double MSRP. And then they came out with what's it called, like the Mass Effect Legendary Edition. Then I'm like, well, should I switch to Legendary Edition, this, that, and the other thing? So it just became a thing, and I just sort of fell out of the habit. I really should, get back at that. But I had got like a bunch of games and like set up a channel and made a trailer for the channel, and that lasted like a month maybe. But at some point I should get back at it. But it's kind of hard to start from scratch with stuff like that. Interaction. Have you seen the video Breaking Up with Adobe by James Lee Animations? I highly recommend if you haven't. Yeah. I think I might have seen it at some point. I don't know if I could ever totally break up with Adobe, but I mean, no, I won't even go there. I have a Patreon and only have 2 patrons. Oh, hey Raven. I didn't even realize you were here. Patreon is the way to go. ContraPoints has 11,138 patrons. That's job quitting territory. I wonder though. I haven't seen her make a video in a while, and is her thing set up so it's like by the video or by the month? Because if it's by the month, I'd kind of be like, hey, where videos? Where is videos? Raven, you'll co-host a live stream with me, right? I'm just not right this moment, but this was something that I was talking about earlier, where I want to start having doing this more often, but having more co-hosts, so I'm not solely responsible for keeping the audience entertained. Awesome. Yeah, definitely want to drag out some of the other OG YouTubers, and but again, as I said earlier, I would like to reach out to some of the other channels that I've discovered within the last couple years, and it's one of those weird things where, because of the way that the algorithm. The YouTube algorithm generally works. There are a lot of people that I would like to pull on for an interview, but then I almost kind of wonder, would they give me the time of day? Because, my channel was here and now it's gone like down, not totally, but it's gone down, right? Whereas it's sort of weird to only be in the ballpark of 20,000 subscribers, because it seems like if you're in that ballpark, you're just like not even on the YouTube radar. So I'm discovering all these channels that I think are cool and have interesting, creators on them. But then I look at their things and it's like, oh, they have like 100,000, they have 50,000, 100,000, 500,000, millions, whatever. And then it's just like, okay. I don't know if I have that kind of pull. So, and a lot of the material on my channel is dated. So I almost feel like I need to start bringing out material that's going to be like a calling card, not necessarily things that are going to be like, look how many views I got, look how much I grew my channel with this, but more modern videos on things that can be again a calling card for enticing some of these people that I have in mind for interviews. But also coming up with a format like that. It's right now I'm just it's definitely under development. But I think part of the reason that I decided to do this today, it's like there were certain events that sort of tipped me back into doing this, because when I don't know, other than maybe Raven, how many of you saw my interview with Goth at Funk on the Dinner Club channel, but that kind of got me like, hey, I should stream more, put that more into my mind. And then doing a one-shot D&D campaign, it is the reason that I have all of this stuff set up and ready to go this week. And I bought a loop deck. I don't know how some of you might be familiar with I think it's called the Stream Deck. Stream Deck. It's very similar, although it doesn't have buttons so much as it has touchscreen, but it also has knobs on the side. I gotta figure out if I can. I'm pretty sure I should be able to use this for like music too, because it did have like MIDI. It was saying something like it had MIDI Mackie setup controls. I would be really interested to see if I could use this as like a synth controller in my DAWs. But it's basically a macro controller, and personally I am a sucker for macro anything. I have there's macros. There's like macros on my mouse. There's macros on my keyboard. I've bought several other, macro controllers. But the problem that I had with all of them is that most of the time I just forget. Maybe in certain cases there might be like one go-to button, like the ones the macro buttons on my mouse. I know what they all do, and I know how to use them by muscle memory. But then I'll program other things, and I'm like, what did this do? And I'll constantly have to like go back and just remember what the hell I programmed it to. With the loop deck, it has icons, so I can see it's basically like a screen, so I know exactly what it does. Like, oh, this button goes to the be right back. And that button switches things back on. So it's, I don't have to remember any of that thing. I can program it a lot easier. All of that stuff. And I bought this recently, and now that I've sank a bunch of money into it, I suppose I'm obligated to actually use it for what its primary use would probably be, like streaming and other things that you need macros for. Let me catch back up on the chat. I think if you were on Twitch commentating on politics, you'd get a following in no time, but putting in the hours sucks. Again, I don't know how well my political takes would go, because I feel like I approach politics somewhat differently than a lot of what people might be used to, because I think a lot of it's like kids' table stuff, where they're bickering over this, that, and the other thing. And there are certain things that it would just be either constantly commentating on, like, what the fuck are these bigoted idiots trying to, foist on their poor red states now. Like, Texas deserves better than this. Like, oh my God, Florida deserves better than that. This is what happens when the lunatics run the asylum. I mean, the commentary of that, like, shake my head and just sigh in despair for the state of my country. Or it would be like, okay, let's get to like political philosophy or first principles. But I'm not I'm also not one of those people who are like, let me tell you about a narco-syndicalism. Let me tell you, like, I'm not like some like tanky or anarchist that has a very particular philosophical axe to grind. Like, this is my philosophical hobby horse, and I'm going to, I try and approach things in a more bottom-up fashion. Or I have a lot of different, a lot of different angles that I tend to come at things at that are not like that kind of like, here's my ideology, fight me. Where is the interview? Sorry. Yeah, I should post a... Let me... Jeez, I didn't realize. See, I hit the wrong button, and now it's showing the link. Now you can get some sense of, like... With the picture-in-picture, you can get some sense of how out of sync the thing actually is. Let's see. Okay. Oh, speaking of, now that I'm having this link that I'm about to post, that reminds me that another thing in terms of like getting with the times, that's a link to the interview. Another thing with getting with the times, buffering. Why is this buffering? Error, YouTube is not receiving enough video to maintain a smooth stream. As such, huh. What the hell is this about? I have no idea why that is. Honestly, I have fiber optic internet. I should not be doing this crap, but who knows. Anyway, speaking of getting with the times, I also made a Discord server. I have not fully set it up, but I probably should post a link to that, because I found that I've been using Discord a lot more like on a personal level. It's to me, I feel like Discord reminds me of like you know, AIM for adults, and it's definitely something I use to like hang out with people. And one of the problems that I've always had with any sort of platform like what's it called, Facebook, you know, so I'd start a Facebook page for this channel. I'd want to post links, and then it would say, well, we'll show it to some people, but if you want everyone who's followed your thing to see it, then you're going to have to pay us. I was like, oh no, you don't. A lot of social media, it just, if you want to like share things with your followers, the nature of most social media is like, pay us, okay? And I'm not really totally down with that. For obvious reasons. And I think the closest thing I can come up with to a server, hold on a second. The closest thing I can come up with to a platform where I can communicate with followers is, you know, where it's not, I'm not bound to some algorithm that decides whether or not whether or not it wants to show what I'm sending to my audience or not, without that interference, right? Is something like Discord. And plus, I've just started to use it more, like, on a personal level. Let's see. Let me go back to the... What is my opinion of GM-less gaming? Is it a myth, or is it a myth or a real thing? You mean like tabletop RPGs without a GM? The closest thing I could really think to that is something like the Arkham Horror card game, where it's obviously the characters and other things are very much based on what's it called? Very much based on RPGs, and yet at the same time it's cooperative, and you're playing against a deck, like a scenario deck. That's the closest thing I can even think of to what you might be talking about. Let's see. Where's the next comment? It said, I've seen it before with channels that had less than 100,000 subs. Suddenly the algorithm spreads their content and they blew up to 500 to 700,000, especially if it's a hot topic. Yeah, I mean, there is a game to be played. That is for sure. There's definitely a game as far as picking your topics, and but I've known that for over a decade now. Let's see. Raven said something. I've been trying to get noticed more, but I'm afraid to talk about some of the trans stuff. But at the same time, I don't want to be roped into all trans stuff. Yeah. That's another problem that you bring up about YouTube. Just like the way YouTube algorithms favor things in general. Like I made a couple of off-brand things recently, a while back, like book reviews, and it was clear from the views that I got that part of it genuinely could have been the audience just was like, this is not for me. But I think also part of it because YouTube just looked at the content of it, to the extent that they can, the tags, the topic of discussion, and then just went, this is off-brand. We're nixing this. And so trying to do, it's the algorithms themselves tend to skew people toward, tend to favor consistency in a brand, because it just wants to, it wants to be able to slot you into a category for its recommendations, rather than rather than being it based on your subscribers, which I don't think YouTube cares about your subscriptions anymore. The very idea, the subscriptions from our point of view, as the end user, matter to us. I don't, and I think it helps drive. Well, I shouldn't say they don't care at all. They don't care as much as content creators might imagine they do, because YouTube knows that. If it wanted, it could make. They could just make it so that there was one video literally everyone on YouTube had to watch. They just have the site just be like, you cannot go any further in this site until you've watched this video. They can promote any video any way they want, and that there are certain benefits from YouTube's algorithm's point of view to having subscribers. But I think it's more like the overall. It's like, how can we pitch this to rando people? And so it's more about, can you make consistency in your channel? Have I heard of Hassan and Vosh or Destiny? I've heard of Vosh. Destiny, I probably have seen clips of these people, but not a lot of them am I super familiar with. I've definitely heard of Vosh, though, and some of these names sound familiar. Political discussion on Twitch is a pretty 2 IQ. You can do it. You mean 200? Yeah, 200. Right? See, I would have to really take the time to watch some political streamers on Twitch. I wonder if that would cause copyright problems if I just pulled up let's pull up a rando stream. But then I don't know how the copyright system would work in between YouTube and Twitch if I were to pull it up in the browser and start watching something and then doing commentary on it. I've thought about doing that too, pulling up a YouTube video and giving commentary on it, but I'm not entirely sure if that would cause copyright problems. But you know what? if anyone has a video that they want me to like react to that they don't think would cause some sort of copyright problem, I offer now is the time to put it into the description or put it into the chat, and maybe we can give that a shot. And if it ends up getting the stream pulled, then it's been fun. Have a good night. Let's see. What's my opinion on the Powered by the Apocalypse TTRPG design framework? Nah, I do not know. It sounds like something I would be interested in, because I'm definitely one of those people who's interested in, you know, the design of games. Even if I'm not particularly good at a game myself, I tend not to be the sort of person who's like, let me create the best possible, you know, deck or army list or whatever. I'm more the person who's thinking like about how the game is, you know, like how the game itself is designed, and how it can go wrong, and just like how these companies are able to, you know, a company like Wizards of the Coast are able to constantly balance trying to create something new with trying to fight power creep while keeping all of the colors in their lane, so to speak. Like, design issues like that interest me. But I am not familiar with Powered by the Apocalypse. I'll have to look that up, though. You kind of stand out with the way you present opinions and discussions that isn't at all common. I can't think of anyone who sounds like you. Well, what, just out of curiosity, how would, if you could describe what you think it is that I do different? Like, what is this special sauce of Tool Time, as best you can describe it? Because I have some, if I felt like in all honesty, if I felt like I had nothing different or unusual or original to say, I would not bother. If I felt like my point of view was adequately, you know, was basically adequately expressed by other people, I'd be like, I got better things to do than record videos or stream or whatever else. I'm not really one of those people who's just like, I'm making videos, look at my opinion, I don't care if it's the same as everyone else's. I mean, I'm like a fairly like low-key kind of person. And, you know, there's definitely a side to me that's like, I'm going to get on camera, I'm going to talk to random people, I have the audacity to share my opinion publicly on the internet. And so I can't pretend that I have like zero ego or zero whatever, but at the same time, I'm probably not, like, the psychology of what makes me do this is probably slightly different than certain other people. But who knows? Let's see. Those streamers do all the time, watching other people's content. Yeah, that's definitely true. I've definitely seen like what you're talking about. The trick to Twitch is to argue like an absolute psychopath, or repeat a CNN talking points and say "my dude," "my guy" at the end of every sentence. Am I gonna have to like go through a crash course in Urban Dictionary to understand what the kids today are saying now? Because, in all honesty, like, outside of, you know, just people that I interact with in a service capacity, or, you know, some of my coworkers, I suppose, I don't even think I know anyone under 30, other than like my nephews, and I have a niece and 3 nephews, and other than like those sorts of, well, yeah, I guess some of my cousins have younger kids too. So other than like people in my family, I don't, in like coworkers and just random, you know, like people working at McDonald's or whatever that I interact with, I don't know anyone under 30, so I don't really, I'm not really up on what the kids say nowadays, and all the lingo, and I sometimes I'll pick something up somewhere and then I'll like use it ironically. Because being a millennial, it's all about the irony. The only game I play regularly these days is Open Roller Coaster Tycoon 2. I've never really played a game like that. I mean, I've seen like one of the OG Roller Coaster Tycoons. You could possibly do roundtables or podcasts on Twitch. These are people that host these. You just need to ask. Sometimes you don't need to be a big following for your voice to be heard. Yeah. I remember seeing, who was it? There was somebody that I was watching on YouTube that was making more political videos, and he posted a video that was him doing a roundtable discussion. I think it was on Twitch about the war in Ukraine, and it was some political discussion about that. And it was, there were points where I was like, wow, I would not have the patience for this. Some of the, like, there was one person there that was just like, you know, they weren't a tanky, but they had this really, you know, the kind of like, I'm a Russian apologist, but I'm trying not to be a Russian apologist sort of take. And, you know, well, what about American foreign policy? You know, that sort of like, that sort of hot take that's actually pretty trite when you get down to it, that a lot of people are just like, we can't, like, you know, their whole worldview is based on like the, you know, the American empire bad, and suddenly they're like, wait a minute, it's the whole world isn't just you know, about, it's not all about America. Another country can do something and America can be on the right side of something. No, we have to make this all about how, anyway. But it was a bunch of people like talking over each other to the point of like infantile shouting, and I saw that. I'm like, I'm really, yeah, I'm probably not likely to be the person that's going to go into a chat full of 8 people and dominate it. I'm going to be the person that's just like hanging back and listening. And that's usually, that's what I was, you know, there have been times, you know, like the dinner club, I posted the link to that, and, you know, they often do multi-people, you know, multi-person chats. And I've been on a couple times. I mean, when they usually host it is not good timing for me, but I often find that it's hard for me to really jump into the conversation a lot of the times. And it's like, if I'm going to spend an hour or two on there, and you know, 95% of the time I'm just going to be listening to other people, it's like I could just watch the stream and you know, give up that 5% of the time I'm going to have my say. Let's see. You're pretty down to earth. I think you might stand out as a more mature voice. I remember being turned around on feminists by your Gamergate era videos. Well, that's good to hear. I honestly feel like with a lot of that Gamergates, it wasn't even really gaming. It was kind of even before Gamergate. But with a lot of that stuff, I just feel like this was the first time they were ever being exposed to some of these ideas. And on one hand, you had Anita Sarkeesian that just sort of like took certain ideas for granted, and on the other hand, you had like a group of people who were just being like slammed with concepts that they're, you know, they have no real context for. And there's a part of me, I mean, I think a lot of those people were jackasses, and I don't want to give too much credit to them, but there's a part of me that does understand the mentality, some of that mentality, in that they can feel like they're sort of like, they're, for want of a better way to put it, their masculinity is under attack, and not in a like macho, you know, like me man, me, you know, me punch you in the face, but in that there are definitely aspects of feminism and social justice that can be off-putting and alienating to, you know, your average young white man. And a feminist or a social justice person say, well, you know, that's not really our problem. But here's the thing. I think there are a lot of people on the opposite side of that equation who say, okay, you know, they basically, you know, come with us. We will embrace you with both arms. We'll tell you that you are right. Just like the push-pull of the psychology of that. I think that, is kind of stacked in favor of a lot of people taking these, anti-feminist extremist positions because, one side can be off-putting in certain ways. It's just, for better or worse, I just think that's true. And the other side is like, even though they have their own profound toxicity, can make certain people, certain young men feel embraced with open arms. And so there's a certain, just like base level psychological appeal to it. But anyway, I was in the middle of reading comments. Do you like video essayists better? This is something I've been wanting to do for a long time, is make a video that is a parody of video essays. Part of it is the scripting, but part of it is about taking a very specific sort of tone. See, all of these video essays have one thing in common. The speaking style, the pace, and the structure are all very similar. I can't do it off the top of my head, but I think that you can kind of, if you watch enough of these things, there's something very, when you're watching a video essay, like if you just walked in, to a room and you heard it in the background, you just like immediately know, like, oh, this is a YouTube video essay, just by the way that they're talking. Even if it was, like, let's say it was in a language you didn't even speak, right? Like it's in, German. You're like, oh, I bet this, I've forgotten pretty much all the German I learned in college. But if I walked into the room, and I heard that particular like cadence and tone, I'd be like, oh, this must be a video essay, right? Oh, so you were the one, I met you at a convention. 100% can confirm the shyness concerning a conversation. Were you the person that was at the 3D, I don't know if it was Oculus or what, it was one of those things. It's not that I'm shy about having conversations, I'm just terrible at making small talk with like strangers. There has to be like a context. Let's see. Verbally murder these people, Peter? Who? Who am I going to verbally murder? Extremely thoughtful. I wish you were on Twitch politics panels too. Well, if that's where the game is at nowadays, I shouldn't get overly attached to YouTube. I should be more concerned about building my pan social media brand instead of fixating on the subscriber numbers of this particular channel, in all honesty. I guess you sound like someone who would talk the whole way on a long road trip. There wouldn't be a worry about running out of topics. I wouldn't be the sole. I mean, yeah, I could hold a conversation through a long road trip. I've done that before with friends and family members, but I'm not just gonna like talk at you for 8 hours. Calm and thoughtful would be a breath of fresh air. That's just, let me tell you something. That is partly a facade. I'm obviously, have enough sense not to make a complete ass of myself on the, live video or the internet or record it like that. But there are moments where, like, believe me, in any sort of like contentious debate, there are explosive sides to me in that regard. If the right buttons are pushed. And it's kind of interesting because I remember one time I made a video and I affected a voice that was kind of mocking of someone, and there were a lot of people. I got like comments that were like, oh, they were very negative towards it, like, oh, this is beneath you, this is you. I'm like, no, this very much is me. Like I can be incredibly condescending and dismissive and you're a fucking idiot, rip your fucking head from your ass type of person when the chips are down, in certain situations. But so yeah, I'm definitely not always calm, but it's not something that I'll just do unprovoked, because there are definitely people who being at that level all the time is their brand. I have to feel like justified in doing that. There has to be a context, where this person has and that's I feel like if I were to do live reactions to videos, so the sorts of videos that that you might expect me to do a video response to nowadays, if I were to just do a live reaction to that rather than just carefully think it through and mark out things and put it in my video editor, if I was to do a live reaction, it would just be I yell at my computer screen a lot, believe me. Bisexual lighting? What does that even mean? Populism usually bad? I feel like that's a semantic game. It's well, how do you define this populism? What about this populism? There was this populist movement, and in hindsight, blah blah blah, but not in hindsight, blah blah blah. Twitch streamers shrug. Yeah. Yeah, if any of you want to go and check out my Game Time with Peter channel, I have not entirely given up on it. I just haven't done it with anything in a while, and I think I also made a parallel YouTube channel for that too, that I made for game streaming. At some point, because I have yet to play the third Mass Effect game. The whole premise of it was I was going to just now that there was a lockdown, I was going to catch up on all these video games over the last decade or more that I hadn't really ever gotten around to playing, because being into video games is one of those things that comes and goes in my life, and I'll have I'm definitely one of those people that could sink 200 hours into something like Breath of the Wild or some other game and then not touch a video game at all for 6 months. Let's see. Too bad we didn't get any video essays from Gilbert Godfrey. You could hire Bobcat Goldweight to narrate one. Indeed, I was a weirdo. Yeah. Did you? Yeah. So you were at the convention. Did you try out the 3D? I still feel that was the first time that I think that I'd really tried. That was the third time I'd ever tried 3D, but the first time I think I had tried a standalone 3D console at this convention. The time before that, I had tried one of those ones that you put your cell phone into it, and that was okay, but I didn't own one because the cell phone I had wasn't compatible with that. And the only other time I tried, not 3D, virtual reality. There's the word I'm looking for, virtual reality. The only other time I had ever tried virtual reality was at a Dave & Buster's in the late 90s, back when it had Sega Genesis, maybe crude PlayStation 1 graphics. And it's fine. It's kind of a novelty, but when Facebook rebranded to Meta and everything's about the metaverse now, I'm oh, I understand why their stock went, because it's what is it with all these billionaires just pouring money into these fucking pipe dreams? I don't understand. I mean, it's not saying it's impossible. It just seems like it's not something we're going to be. It's not something that's going to see widespread adoption as soon as companies like that would be banking on it. I'm not saying they're never going to be never be that, but I think it's a very premature to completely rebrand when you haven't even gotten the technology down, let alone started to push it in terms of social adoption. Are you tired of Zoom meetings? Now all your coworkers can be fucking furries. That will make Zoom meetings better. Yeah, let's not. I don't have anything against furries, by the way, and I actually did have a coworker that admitted to being a furry once. But I'm just saying, that seems to be what is the point of doing something like a Zoom meeting and something like the metaverse? it seems like there's a definitely like, what exactly are you thinking? Like, what do you have up your sleeve, or is this just some, windmill you're tilting with your billions of dollars? Networking advice, reach out to, is that, Tomfoolery Shoe on YouTube. He's well connected behind the scenes to the online panel scene and helps get people in. Tom also streams on YouTube to a small community and always invites them to debate. Oh, bisexual lighting is a video essay trope where you are bathed in two colors of lights, usually blue and pink. Very surreal to see a live stream of you in the present day. Game time, yeah. Is game time with Peter a nice way to play? Yeah, it's a nice pun, I guess. The Shock of God video response was an example of me, a very measured but on the edge of rage video. Everybody from the community still exists. I have a classmate that went to their graduation in a full fursuit. Yeah, that's a thing. I'm just like, I'm honestly one of those people where it's like sometimes I judge things on like one level of like, yeah, that's a thing, and I don't understand it, but there's a lot of things that I just can't bring myself to give a shit about. Like whether or not somebody wants to be a furry, or like I never really got into anime, and I go to conventions and they'll be like, there's obviously a lot of like people, there's obviously a lot of presence of anime. It's like I don't really get that. It's I could kind of see it as slightly weird, and I can definitely see why other people would think it's weird, but it's like, you do you. It's your life. Like, I can't be bothered to, get that upset or invested in what other people do with their lives if they're not actively hurting people. But there was something else that I was going to say about the. I completely lost my train of thought. All right, I'll be right back in a second, and then I'll try to regain my train of thought. And we're back. Anyway, I think my train of thought had something to do with commenting on video essays, because somebody was talking about bisexual lighting involving video essays. But there's definitely a very particular way of presenting video essays. There's not only is there a tone of voice, but a structure, and they're always like very often quoting those people. And I have to put this very delicately, because I don't want to sound like I'm shitting on video essayists or that sort of thing, or disparaging them. But in terms of the difference between somebody like that and somebody like myself, I'm not really the sort of person who's going to be there. Like, according to Theodore Adorno, blah, 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 in this work, blah, blah, blah. Like, yes, I went to college. Yes, I had to read stuff like that. Yes, I occasionally even read stuff like that, and it might be necessary to quote a book. But a lot of it's just like they learned to write essays in college, and they're like, how could we take this exact sort of stuff, make it more opinionated, throw in some bisexual lighting and some skits and some wardrobe changes, and then present this to a YouTube audience. And that almost to me is like, I guess it's good for a certain type of person, but it's not necessarily the way to, it seems, inward. It's very like, things like BreadTube can be honestly kind of inward looking. And I'm not the first person to point this out, but it can be very much like we are making this for a very specific sort of person, and here's us citing our sources and quoting these established intellectuals to sound credible to the people that we imagine might watch this and we want to gain credibility with. Maybe we'll get speaking engagements at a university, et cetera, et cetera. And some of them are better at others at engaging the broad people in the middle, because even more so with like something like religious fundamentalism, that I feel like with politics, as polarized as we are, there are a lot of people who just want to feel like there's someone talking sense and not talking past them. And other people have mentioned about me being some people have mentioned about me being like, oh, you seem like more like calm, mature presence sort of thing. I would say if I did have anything to contribute in that regard, it'd be like, hey, maybe we should, explain these things in a way that like normal people can understand, and let's make this all about whatever. But then there are a lot of things that involve the visual presentation of it that I do admire. Not necessarily like the wardrobe changes and bisexual lighting and that sort of stuff like that, but graphics and other visual presentation techniques that require time and energy and a certain acumen with software, that I could do some of that stuff, but it's just like, oh man, the moment I start to think about how would I actually go about doing this? Well, then I have to spend, X amount of minutes making a slide or a visual for this single thing, and then rinse and repeat, and it will take like, the whole production of this video will take, the video will be 20 minutes long, and it will take 8 hours of solid work to actually string together. And I'm like, it will get 300 views. Pass. But if you make them good enough and you keep putting them out, and you do some like, networking and promotion and social media legwork, then eventually you can grow it if you're not just entirely reliant on the algorithm. But yeah, I definitely think that the whole video genre essay is ripe for skewering. And usually my ideas for incorporating more stuff like that are kind of way out of left field. Like I've incorporated a little bit of animation in the past, and I've done things with like characters, but they're toys. And one thing I saw recently, speaking of VR and like avatars and stuff, is that there are certain people that do what is it called, like VR tube or whatever, where they have some sort of they're using some sort of VR program, I guess, to animate an avatar. And well, I wouldn't switch full time to an avatar. Believe me, there are plenty of times that I would like to have anything on screen other than my less than photogenic face. But it would be interesting to have like characters. For example, ContraPoint's videos where she's doing a bunch of different characters. I think that there's something to that I like. That's kind of hard to just get when you're monologuing. There are certain things that there's a limitation to just being like this, a guy staring at the camera, this in your face headshot type of deal. There are certainly limitations to this style of presentation, but I really have to feel like passionate enough about the material to invest the time and energy to do all that work, because there are a lot of people who just don't seem to understand how much work can actually go into this, and they imagine that they're turning on the camera and just talking like this is equivalent to somebody's hours and hours of video editing and scripting and that sort of thing. I don't think any video essayist is from a working class background. Seems like a rich kid thing. It depends on what you mean by a working class background, because I think at least a few of them have had the experience of working shitty jobs, but I don't see them all as just living off of trust funds. But it's more that a lot of them have a college education, and they learned how to please their college professors by presenting information in a certain way. There's definitely like a format to writing a college essay and citing your sources and that sort of thing. And there's a part of me that thinks that bread tube video essays and that sort of thing are, as I said before, essentially taking the college paper format, editorializing in a way that your college professors would not let you get away with, adding in skits and costume changes and lighting, and making something that's like, very much within that mindset, but for a broader audience, but not necessarily from the mindset of a broader audience. But in terms of like coming at things from the working class, I don't even know. I know what that's supposed to mean, in a sense, like it's like I don't know. I know what that's supposed to mean, but it's also, there are other ways you can slice it where who counts as working class is the middle American rural county Trump voter with their pickup truck. They may work in a factory or wherever and be counted as working class, and somebody else can not necessarily be working some sort of white collar job. They could have an education that's a reasonably high level of education, but maybe not be working something that's not necessarily considered a white collar job. So are they working class? Like who's the working class? So given the current resurgence of Christian fundamentalism in politics, do you think we'll see the kind of return of the YouTube atheist era? I ask while you're on the subject of video essays. So I don't know at what point you came into this stream, but I did say at the beginning and at other points throughout that I have been feeling more and more, especially with the current things with the Supreme Court, with all of the things going on the political right, because in my point of view, Christian nationalism is really when you have this Scooby-Doo unmasking of a lot of what's going on with the right and with Trumpism, that a large yes there's a certain amount of cult of Trump. Yes, there's a certain amount of all of these other factors, but I think Christian nationalism is the engine behind a lot of it. And on one hand, I don't want to return to like the old school atheism. I honestly hope that doesn't return, because I honestly think at this point it misses the point. If we want to confront religious fundamentalism, it has to be much more targeted and much more granular. Because, again, I'm not sure what point that you entered this stream and how much of what I said before you might have heard, that you see there's basically like a hierarchy. So you have Republican politicians, and then you have all these basically Christian nationalist lobbying groups like the National Prayer Breakfast, all of these things that are supposed to coordinate the message of the Republican politicians at the the national level. Things like Project Blitz that are Christian nationalist playbook of what they're going to do. Then tied into that, you have the donors that are fueling all of these groups. Then you have the groups below that are meant to network and organize the churches, and then you have the churches themselves, and then you have the people in these churches that become the political shock troops. And there's it's not absolutely organized, but there is a hierarchy and a network to it. And simply having debates over the existence of God or the age of the earth, that is that's very 2008, and it's also kind of very freshman philosophy major type of thing. But as a political force and as a mindset that is motivating the culture war on the right, and even a lot of the Russia apologies, again, if anybody missed this before, I was listening to an audiobook recently called The Power Worshippers, and it had a section on, what they're teaching in these, DeVos charter schools, with the curriculum of these things. And there was a part of the curriculum of, how to think about Vladimir Putin. And it's like, Vladimir Putin isn't, one of those politically correct people pandering to be the socially, the social justice, LGBTQ, political correctness or whatever. And, it was like Putin apologetics as part of these charter school curriculums. And then, war breaks out between Russia and Ukraine, and you see Tucker Carlson basically, if not repeating these talking points word for word, strongly paraphrasing these exact same apologetics that you see in these that's being taught in these charter schools. And then you realize that these networks, these charter schools are, funded by these wealthy individuals like the DeVosses, who are tied into all of these other networks, who are in turn tied to all these, fundamentalist, religious conservative groups in places like Russia, Poland, Hungary, and what's the other country? That's the Belarus, countries like that. You see that there's a sort of a growing like pan Christian nationalist movement that's well funded by completely morally bankrupt people who have learned that when you have a group of people basically raised to be obedient and do not question their leaders and to believe that they have absolute truth and the God-given right to rule where whatever country they're in, be it America or whatever else, that they make the perfect political shock troops, and that religious fundamentalism pairs perfectly well with authoritarianism. And there is a lot I could say about all of that, and this is like the third time in this stream that I've touched on these subjects, and I don't want to completely repeat myself here, but I think that examining these issues, examining the network and power structures of Christian nationalism and how it's animating right-wing politics, instead of just going off on these tangents about like, does God exist? It's like, that's so 2008. Creationism, that's 2008. How these people are specifically working within politics and are working, are fueling all these other aspects of conservative politics and the culture war. Examining and attacking that on a granular level, it seems much more fruitful than any sort of like rehashing any sort of old debates. And there's a part of me that looks at some of those old things as like, oh yeah, if I were to go back to the question of morality, I might answer this question from a different point of view, and that sort of thing. But getting right. Just really laying out who these groups are, what they're doing, the psychology of them. There was one video that I'm thinking about making, and I'm seeing the chat flow up here. But the one video that I have in mind is just basically to go to a lot of the religious fundamentalists and explain just how out of touch they seem to the rest of America, because it's. A lot of it is, as the kids like to say, nowadays, cringe AF. I made a video probably 10, 12 years ago now about how I hate Christian rock. And the number one comment I would get on that video, because it's one of those videos that I have that they would have a long life to it, and I'd get comments on it like years later. The number one comment that I would get on that video is like, I'm a Christian, but I agree. I hate Christian rock. Not only is their media cringe, much of their music, and they consider, Kevin Sorbo and Kirk Cameron to be A-list stars in their Pure Flix cringe fest type of thing. But the psychology and the power dynamic of a lot of the fundamentalism, it makes the people themselves seem like complete rubes who are being exploited and basically used. Like how dumb do you have to be to really fall for this? These preachers saying, I can't fly in a commercial. I have to have a private jet because there are demons there's just so many demons in commercial flights. That's why I have to charter use a chartered private jet. It's very essential to my ministry, and you need to give me money to support my opulent lifestyle. When you see the opulent lifestyles of their most prominent figures in their movement, when you see the scandals that get covered up and pushed under the rug because of the unquestioning obedience which is inculcated into the members, it just seems like a travesty. And it's not like again, having debates over the existence of God, to me, seems beside the point, because on one hand, you have people who are being turned into political shock troopers to be used by power and money-hungry people. On the other hand, though, like those actual people, regardless of, okay, yeah, they believe the world's 6,000 years old and Adam and Eve wrote dinosaurs. That's silly, right? But at the same time, those people are often being, used and abused and exploited in any number of ways, financially, physically, all of these sorts of things. And it just going up against that, just like, I'm not maybe taking the approach of being like, look, you can believe whatever you want to believe, but just like take a step back and look at yourselves, look at your movement, look at, the reason you're regarded by the rest of society isn't because you're being persecuted. Come down from the cross you built for yourself, take out the nails you've put in your own arms and feet, and just like have some objectivity of what complete lunatics and rubes you seem like to everyone else. And like, if you could, I almost feel like if there's any hope for any of that, it's like maybe you just like get them to have some modicum of self-awareness and change things slightly. But anyway, let me catch back up with the chat. Somebody says, oh, please, you're a good-looking dude, way better than Avatar. I didn't say I wasn't good-looking. I'm not saying that I'm not good-looking either. I'm saying I'm not, I personally don't think I'm photogenic. There's a difference. Like, not to sound narcissistic, but I, generally speaking, probably, I just never feel like the camera particularly flatters me. I think I'm a reasonably, like, the brutally honest truth is, I think I'm a reasonably attractive person. Like, I'm not going to be on the cover of GQ or anything like that, but I have enough of an aesthetic sense to look at a lot of other men and just be like, yeah, I'm way more attractive than that guy, I'm sorry, there was this one time years ago, I used to work at this big box retailer, and there was this one person that I used to work with, and he was a pretty cool dude, but he just looked like he looked like Sloth, from the Goonies. Like, not literally that bad where there's, but it's, yeah, I have just enough of an aesthetic sense. It's like, above average, but not going to be featured on the cover of GQ anytime soon. But there's a difference between being attractive and being like photogenic in a way that you just like, you have this like camera presence, if that makes any sense. Like, some people just look good on camera, they have that like polished look through them. That's the other thing too, is like, even if I'm reasonably attractive, I don't necessarily like have that, polished, polished, YouTube, Instagram ready look about me, if that makes any sense. Let's see. Let me catch back up. I don't... okay, that's past that. Music is booming. People just need to find it. I think I must have missed the context for that. Didymus. Okay. I liked your video on criticism of modern music. Could an old school folk singer have attacked the electric guitar as fake and unnatural and acoustic as real? Maybe, but my understanding, though, is that electric guitars were basically invented by acoustic guitar players to be loud enough to play in bars. So I kind of feel that there's like a natural progression there. Or maybe I'm just thinking specifically of Les Paul, like building, because Les Paul is something of a musical hero of mine in terms of, innovating in the sphere of the electric guitar, but also innovating in the sphere of multi-track recording. And he was somebody who, like, he was in a car accident at one point in his life, and the doctors were like, okay, we can fix your arm. He messed up his arm, like for his strumming arm. And they're like, we can fix it so your arm is straight, but you won't be able to play guitar. Or fix it so your arm is always like at an angle at your waist, and you can play guitar, but like you're never gonna have like you're never gonna be able to like bend your arm correctly again. And he's like, well, obviously I'm gonna have my arm, the way where I can continue to play guitar. But let's see. Have I ever watched any videos by Massimo Picciello debating the new atheist types like Lawrence Krauss? No, I don't think so. Is he like an apologist or something like that? See, that's exactly the sort of thing that I would like to avoid, getting in some debate with apologists, because so much of it, I mean, I feel like in the years since I've made those sorts of videos that I have come up with some different and novel approaches to some of those well-worn discussions. But it's more a matter of like, okay, here's the game you're playing, and here's how you are framing this argument, and here's how I do a jujitsu move to flip this on its head, type of thing. Massimo destroyed him. Krauss thought math was empirical. Oh, well, you're probably long gone by now, but thanks for showing up, Circus Cult. There's no such thing as being late to a YouTube stream. You should exactly when you're supposed to. Yeah, it's wizards only here. Greatest Van Dam. Y'all ready to get saved by Jesus? Audio only coming out of the left side. Huh. Are you sure that's not on your end? Oh, wait, hold on a second. That might be on my end. God damn it. Fucking OBS. Advanced audio properties. How? Okay. Yes. You know what? I kind of noticed that before, but not really. So, using a condenser microphone, it's mono only. It's probably the whole stream's going to be like that up until now. But thank you for pointing that out. So since a condenser mic that's mono, and there was like a little setting in there that you have to click the thing saying this is mono, and then it will stereoize it. I thought that I did that. I didn't, and maybe it got somehow like unchecked when I, took a break for a second and it muted it. and maybe when it unmuted it screwed something up. I don't know. But what has the whole stream been like that? Anybody who's been around for a while, like, was it? I don't know at what point that happened. So many technical glitches. I'm just glad that I took the time to set up this loop deck, so I can just be like, press buttons pretty easily. It's one of those things where there's so much more I could do with this. I gotta work on setting all of this stuff up. Maybe though, you know what it might be? I bet it's because I might have set up the microphone that way, and then because I switched to a different scene, like, I wonder if that is something that is determined, like if those settings are like by the scene. And so when I switch from like, okay, this is the desktop view scene where I'm messing around with this Dungeon Alchemist program, and then I switch over towards just the camera. I wonder if it had different settings, but it's in the audio mixer is like carries over. At least it seems to. So I don't know. Like the audio mixer part mostly carries over from scene to scene, but maybe it registers different in all of that. Yeah. But okay, but where'd you want it to go if you want a mega pint? A mega pint of what? You lost me there. That's the problem with the comment section. There seems to be, it's hard to tell exactly, but there seems to be kind of a significant lag in terms of the broadcast of the stream. I've literally, paused the stream, put up an away message, gone to take a piss, come back, and sat back down, went back to the video of this stream and like looked up at the thing, and it's still showing. Like it's still showing before I even went to the bathroom. It's, I don't know. But I'll give the stream a second. Speaking of which, I'm really I've been like talking for hours now, and I'm just gonna go get something to drink real quick. See, and I'm already back before it was showing that I left, so it's definitely a weird lag. But I don't know how up to date the comments are. So maybe the comments are more up to date than the actual thing itself. But shit, it's almost 11:30. I started this at 8, so it's like 5 hours. 8, 9, 11, almost 5 hours. But yeah, I probably won't be on much longer. Maybe I'll stay on to midnight. I'm not sure when the best like time to start and end streams are. But anyway, yeah, I'm on the East Coast. But like I said, in the future, I plan on actually posting, one of those things that says, this is a live stream coming up, like scheduling it. But then it's kind of weird because I sometimes feel like I see more and more people doing these video premiere things, and I'll see it in my subscription thing, and then it will say, oh, this isn't coming up yet. It's going to happen on such and such time, such and such date. And then it will just like disappear in my stream. And sometimes I'll like see that, hey, this is premiering, but it's almost like a good way, like posting something like that. If you post it too far in advance, it seems like a good way to get your video lost. So in theory, it would be a good time to, what's it called? It'd be a good way to notify people in advance to build up some anticipation for the stream and have some people, ready to go when you're ready to stream. On the other hand, it seems like it could be the sort of thing that could get lost. But speaking of notifying people, I think I should probably repost my, since there are a few of you in here now. Let's see. Where the hell's the thing? No, not server settings. I'm going to repost the link to my Discord. It looks like I got at least one more person on Discord. I still have not completely... it's still a work in progress, the Discord server, but it seems like it would be much more reliable in terms of if I want to communicate with people, notify people of new videos, just have chat with people, post links to articles, all the things that I wanted to do on something like a Facebook page, and then I realized that Facebook's like, oh, you want people to actually know that this is a thing. Well, you're gonna have to pay us because this is all all of these pages are for basically, business promotion and advertising and stuff like that. Where something like a Discord server, it's just like if I post something, I mean, I hope everyone who has Discord has enough sense to like deactivate unnecessary notifications from Discord, so that it's not bugging the hell out of you. But by all means, join the Discord server. And I can, not only reliably post links to new videos or announce when I'm going to be streaming, but if I find articles or other video, I think I'm going to create a channel for videos. It's going to be locked so that only I can post in it. There'll be like videos and news articles I find interesting, and then I'll have another like open channel for videos that other people think I should watch. Yeah, so there'll be like a video recommendation section and some other things like that. I know there's ways to do like call-in shows with Discord. I've looked into that, but it seems like the sort of thing that would require it will require moderators and other people setting it up. I get the impression that it's a little tricky to do solo, but. I've also, that's another thing that I looked into, is doing some sort of call-in thing. Just stream for 16 hours every day for 6 months. Make a plot of the average streamers for certain days and times, and you'll have a pretty good number. Easy, yeah. Honestly, sometimes I'll just go on Twitch. I'll find myself in a mood to just go on Twitch, and I'll find basically semi-random people and just like drop in and see what they're doing, and just get a feel for it. Mostly in like the just chatting section. I'm not a big fan of like watching other people play video games and that sort of stuff, but sometimes it's interesting to go into the just chatting. There's this one Twitch streamer I think it's called like Yingleberry or something like that. She's pretty funny. It's like the weird, kind of quirky sense of humor that is like totally my jam. I mentioned something about stonks because of this background thing that she had, and she just ran with that for a while. But then they're like, so occasionally you find gems like that where it's like, oh, this person's pretty cool and entertaining, and then you find people who it's just like, why are you bothering? like this is maybe not your forte. You're not particularly engaging or entertaining, and I'm sure that this stream, I don't even want to think about watching this stream back because a whole lot of waffling. But in the future, aside from announcing these streams, I think that I also need to plan out some kind of structure beforehand. This time, I thought, okay, maybe I will, mess around building some stuff for my D&D games, and that will kill time in the stream. And then I kind of realized that, it was too distracting, basically. On the other hand, I feel like I'm just flying by the seat of my pants here. That if I know that there are people who they'll pick news articles and they have like a list of news articles that they're going to comment on and that sort of thing, videos to react to. I feel like I should do a little more research into copyright implications or anything that's going to get the stream pulled or any problems like that. Anyway, definitely more structure in the future, but it's all, this is something that I've been kind of experimenting with, months ago. It's been more than 6 months since I did like a painting stream, and as I mentioned before, that just didn't work out. It's a combination of trying to do that was too distracting with the camera setup wasn't. I was trying to paint in a way that wasn't the way that I would normally, hold things and paint. If I were to actually set up the camera, closer to how I would normally paint, it would just be like you'd just be getting a crotch shot. So I don't think that really. I don't think people want that. I'm sure there's probably one or two of you that would, but just generally speaking, I don't think that would go over too well. So I just for that, through the combination of the distraction and the logistics of it, I didn't think that the streaming worked out. I'm feeling like this, like trying to mess around with software is not didn't really work out today either. But the more you know. I think it's also in part the fact that I just didn't have in mind what I wanted to build in that software, so I was just trying to like come up with something on the fly, and that just required too much brain power in the midst of trying to talk and maintain a train of thought as well. But anyway, anything new? Did I miss anything in the chat? Let's see. Good seeing you, bro. There must be somebody else that dipped out. Anyway, so it's like 11:30 East Coast time. Indeed. I should probably end this here. I think that I don't want to promise exactly when I'm going to do another stream, but I've enjoyed this enough where I think that I'm going to probably try and do another stream in about a week, and hopefully we'll be more prepared in various and sundry ways. But I'm going to cut it off for here right now. Have a good night. See, I'm getting comments as if people can see the stream, but the video there is like a minute ago. The comments seem like they're responding in real time to me, so who the fuck knows what's going on with this? Anyway, have a good whatever time it is.